Chapter 646. First Court King Qingguang was baffled by Yun Yang's ability as well. He did not know more than the others. Hearing what King Chujiang had said to him, he was dumbfounded. Today's incident has indeed broadened my horizons once again. TSK, Tisk, Emperor Song and King Wuguan clicked their tongues and shook their heads as they walked into the room. More noises could be heard. The other kings wore expressions of bewilderment as well, deep in thought. Thousands of thoughts were running rampant in their minds. Based on the outcome alone, today's matter was just a very ordinary battle. It was nothing more than one party being assassinated and waiting for reinforcements. Under very, very difficult circumstances, one party had fought valiantly and finally managed to hold out until the arrival of reinforcements. Then, they had turned defeat into victory and killed the ambushing enemy, wiping them all out in one fell swoop. Was this not a very normal thing to do? Although it was not common, it was still within reason. Moreover, it was commonly seen in novels. It was common and very common. However, in the eyes of high-level cultivators like the 10 court Yama kings, the entire incident was simply unbelievable. There were too many suspicious points, too many incomprehensible things that went against common sense. It was an assassin's habit to analyze a battle thoroughly, especially such a strange one. Everyone's eyes were on the King of Equality. The King of Equality said faintly, "The ambushing party sent out a total of 16 top-notch assassins. Even the weakest of these assassins is stronger than our gold-ranked assassins. Their combined combat power is astonishing. Even if they were to target any one of us, it would be more than enough. This is also referring to us after our abilities had a breakthrough. However, even with such a lineup, the final result was still a great loss. We captured 10 people on the scene and only one managed to escape. As for the 5 people who died before this, 2 of them were cleaved into halves. I believe everyone can see this. The next step in the process of death should be a single move. The attacker exerted his full strength and killed both of them in one blow. There were no tricks involved, it was a clean kill." Everyone nodded. There was another person who died because he was kicked. There was a footprint on his lower abdomen. Not only did the force of the kick enter from the front to the back, but it also destroyed all the meridians, bones, and organs in the lower abdomen. There was no one who was lucky enough to survive. The other person looks unharmed on the surface, but his internal organs are all shattered. The saber hilt in his hand is also filled with cracks. Yin Yang's forceful counterattack must have broken his weapon. Not only did he break his weapon, he even penetrated it and destroyed his internal organs. How could he not die? As for the last person, he died from a saber wound as well. However, his fatal wound was a slit in the throat, but it was different from a normal slit in the throat. A normal slit in the throat would travel horizontally, but this person's slit in the throat traveled vertically from the bottom up. The edge of the saber probably quivered a little, causing the wound to appear strangely distorted. These signs prove that Yun Yang was attacked and injured when he killed this person, but he did not stop his killing because of his injury. Instead, he forced himself to stay and killed this person with a single slash. Everyone knew that the King of Equality's analytical and reasoning ability was ridiculously strong, so they listened quietly without interjecting. After coming to the conclusion of the deceased's cause of death, I'm even more confused. The King of Equality said, "From the traces we've observed along the way, Yun Yang's first move was a fatal one. He killed 2 people in one go. Although he succeeded, his mystical chi was inevitably depleted, and it was even more difficult for him to move freely while carrying another person. Therefore, when he faced the third person, he must have used some trickery and kicked the other person to death. He even borrowed the force from the kick to move to the next location. Then, when he faced the 4th person, he mustered his mystical chi to the limit again and killed the other person with one strike. This was the extreme exertion of his true skill, or else it wouldn't have been possible. However, everyone knows that Yun Yang's true cultivation base is only half a step to Dao realm. The one who was killed with one slash was a cultivator at the pinnacle of the 8th heaven realm. The absolute gap between their abilities isn't that great. The only reason for such an outcome is that Yun Yang must have risked his life at that time. I believe that it's also because of the continuous mustering of his mystical chi and the continuous depletion that when he killed the last assassin, he wasn't strong enough. Perhaps, the other party was about to surround him, so he killed his opponent quickly at the cost of a little injury. Does anyone have any objections to these deductions? No objections, I agree completely. The other 9 Yama kings nodded like chicks pecking at grains. Each of the 10 court Yama kings was an outstanding figure in the world of assassins. Naturally, they were familiar with the art of killing, so they had no objections and reached a consensus immediately. Based on the facts above, we can make a further deduction. Although Yun Yang killed the 5 of them swiftly, he paid a hefty price. Not only did he unleash his maximum ability twice, but he was also slightly injured as a result. Does anyone have any objections to this? No, that's it. It's also because of this reason that Yun Yang slowed down after killing the 5 people, causing him to be surrounded and unable to escape. Of course, another reason for the difficulty in escaping is Shangguan Lingxiu, but the main reason is that Yun Yang didn't have enough time to catch his breath. If Yun Yang was still in his peak condition after killing the 5 people, he could have broken out of the encirclement even if he had to bring Shangguan Lingxiu along. Does anyone have any objections to this? No. It should be like this. Let me ask one more thing. Everyone can raise any questions or objections to all the deductions above. Does anyone have any questions? Ask the King of Equality. The other 9 did not answer directly this time, but after a moment of contemplation, they signaled cautiously one after another. No one had any objections or questions. The King of Equality heaved a long sigh. I'm afraid you're taking it for granted that you don't have any questions or objections. I, on the other hand, have many questions that I don't understand. There are questions everywhere, big questions. Why don't you have any objections? The group was stunned when they heard him, asking in confusion, what questions? What discoveries? The King of Equality said, the first question is the battle traces left behind on the battlefield. That is, from the hotel to the many traces left behind along the way, we can easily confirm that there were many hidden weapon experts who worked together. Other than the hidden weapon experts, there were at least 2 or 3 who were proficient in deicide bow archery. Don't tell me you didn't discover this? The group nodded. Yes, we did. So what? Nothing much. When Yun Yang jumped out of the restaurant, he couldn't help but be ambushed by the deicide bows. There were at least 3 archers firing together, but where did these hidden weapon experts, especially the 3 deicide archers, go when he was besieged? If they had continued to attack, it should have affected the battle considerably, the King of Equality asked quietly. The group's eyes widened as they thought about it. TSK. Have you thought of it? Is it shocking? Of the people who had attacked him earlier, 5 were dead, and the 6th had his hand severed. It looked like a rather difficult result, but the real mystery was yet to come. When the other party surrounded Yun Yang, it was advantageous to end the battle quickly. It should have been the time for those who were proficient in hidden weapons to show their prowess, but those hidden weapon experts and deicide archers didn't even fire a single hidden weapon or shoot an arrow. Why is this so? Where did these hidden weapon experts go? If this chapter is written, there will be a lot of criticism, but if it's not written, the protagonist's awesomeness can't be shown. Chapter 647. Where did these secret weapon experts go? The King of Equality asked menacingly. First Court King Qingguang was tongue-tied as he said, the only reasonable explanation is that the 5 people he killed earlier and the one whose right hand was chopped off are all of the adepts who are proficient in secret weapons and deicide bow in this trip. Hearing King Qingguang's reasonable explanation, everyone looked at each other in dismay. Their faces were filled with shock. This was the only possibility. If this was the truth, was Yun Yang not terrifying? However, other than this possibility, there seemed to be no other reasonable possibility. There was no other possibility that could make the assassins give up on their plan to lead the other party to a quick victory. In the face of a sudden and fatal attack that came without any warning, he quickly formulated his own strategy and tactics to deal with it. He accurately found the enemy who posed the greatest threat to him at the first possible moment and killed them all before he escaped to the battlefield where he could wait for reinforcements to arrive. This was to prevent any variables from appearing and interfering with the development of the battle. Such scheming is truly shocking, terrifying, and appalling. First Court King Qingguang could not help sucking in a cold breath as he thought about it. What kind of brain did he possess? Was he still human? Among these assassins, the weakest one's cultivation base was also at the sixth heaven realm. The King of Equality said in a low voice, as for the strongest one, the only one who managed to escape, his cultivation base was at the second or even third heaven of Dao realm. Yin Yang's cultivation base, on the other hand, we all know that he's only at the ninth heaven realm, half a step to Dao realm at most. His actual ability was far behind the other party and he had to adapt hastily, even bringing along a woman who was a complete burden. Yet, he had to kill the 5 secret weapon experts who posed the greatest threat to him within an extremely short distance before choosing a place to wait for reinforcements to begin the final battle. He was delaying the battle and waiting for reinforcements. He sucked in a long breath and said, "Let's not talk about others. If it were me, I wouldn't have been able to do it. You should know that when we arrived, the combat power of those who participated in the siege was less than 30% of their original state." Yin Yang's delaying tactic wasn't just to delay the battle and wait for reinforcements. In fact, he alone had already worn them down. Everyone fell silent. The more he thought about it, the more terrified he became. Just how sharp of an observation skill was needed to accomplish all of this? Just how terrifying of a calculation was needed? Just how subtle of an operation was needed? Just how much? All of this was unimaginable and unbelievable. Actually, what's even more unbelievable is the battle after that. The King of Equality sighed. "I believe that you have not overlooked the fact that those assassins are all using heavy weapons. They have adopted a head-on strategy. Why is that so? Obviously, the assassins are afraid of Yun Yang's combat skills, which is why they've chosen such a barbaric and unreasonable method to counter Yun Yang's marvelous skill. Of course, this is also because they have the advantage in numbers. It is reasonable for them to make such a choice. If it were us, we would also make the same choice. However, what baffles me the most about this battle is, with Yun Yang's cultivation base, he could actually fight against so many ace cultivators and still hold on until our reinforcements arrived. This is really incomprehensible. Even if Yun Yang is a local tyrant and found a relatively advantageous terrain for him, it's impossible for him to overcome such a huge disadvantage. It can't be that the assassins have shown him mercy, can it? Puzzled as it is, Yun Yang has done it after all. This is the truth and the main point. The King of Equality sighed. As long as such a character lives on, I believe his future will be unimaginable. The kings were speechless. No matter what height he goes to in the future, I won't find it strange anymore. The King of Equality smiled bitterly. Perhaps we should thank King Qingguang now. We were still calling him an idiot back then, but, if he had done nothing back then, we would no longer be friends now. I'd rather be the enemy of the Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nian than be afraid to be the enemy of any expert in the arcane realm, but I'm not willing to be the enemy of someone like Yun Yang. The King of Equality said resolutely. The situation was similar to that of the 10 Yama kings of the concourse of the underworlds for noble young masters. Ever since they returned, the 4 young masters were surprised to find that their guards were all silent. Occasionally, their gazes would meet, but it was as if they knew each other and understood each other's intentions. Of course, it was more of the shock of understanding than anything else. As they witnessed the situation, the 4 fellows who were usually insensitive also felt that something was amiss. Naturally, they were not too afraid of their subordinates and asked directly. "What's wrong with all of you? Are you all glaring at each other? What's with that shocked gaze? Haven't we won the battle today? Elder Yun has shown his prowess, dominating the world and dominating the universe. Cough. An elderly guard hesitated and said softly, "Young Master Yun's elegance is more than this. This battle is enough to create a new miracle in the history of the martial world." Miracle? The four young masters were dumbfounded. Their bewilderment was real. They had long been used to Yun Yang's high profile and had habitually placed Yun Yang on a high pedestal. Today, when they saw Yun Yang fighting against many and not being at a disadvantage, they were amazed, but they did not take it to heart. What they said just now was more out of habit, the habitual flattery of Yun Yang. Although it was sincere, there was nothing more to it. In spite of this, the guards who followed the four noble young masters were all veterans of the martial world. Recently, they had been fortunate enough to cultivate in a sacred cultivation ground like the residence of Yun. They had even gone through the life and death battles of the Fortress of Resilience. Everyone's cultivation base, knowledge, and judgment had been greatly enhanced. Complemented by their past experiences, how could they not be shocked by Yun Yang's performance today? Miracle. Truly a miracle. The guard sighed and recounted what he had seen. Of course, his description was not as thorough as the King of Equalities, but as a veteran of the martial world, his vision was equally sharp and vicious, pointing straight to the crux of the matter. "I've always known that boss is amazing, but I didn't expect boss to be so brilliant in all aspects other than his cultivation base and skills." Dong Tianlong was delighted after listening to the guard. "That's my boss indeed." Chun Wanfeng was fascinated as well. "If I were in the same situation, I'd be so cool just thinking about it." "It's so cool, how can he be so cool?" Xia Bingchuan pursed his lips. "If you were in such a situation, the grass on your grave would have sprouted a dozen times by now." Chiu Yunsan looked disdainful. "What are you three fools talking about? Wasn't boss like this before? If he wasn't at this level, would he still be our boss? Now that it's all over, all of you still want to be glorified here. Look at me, how calm I am." He walked away with his arms behind his back. "When you see boss tomorrow, you're not allowed to flatter him. Just listen to me. I'll only speak the truth, say that boss is chivalrous, gentle, courageous, and handsome, a dragon among men. Beat this bastard up, beat him up until he can't speak. The truth can't be spoken blindly, at least not by him alone. There was a sudden power outage last night. I don't know what happened, but the wiring was burnt. The property management said it would take a few days. The wiring of more than 10 floors needs to be replaced. It's all burnt. The property management is investigating the cause as well. I'm sweating. F***CK, it was one step away from a fire. Your father was on the 25th floor. Chapter 648. Yun Xiaoyao looked at Yun Yang, whom he had carried all the way back, his heart filled with shock and speechlessness. This ability was too formidable. It had to be said that the other party's ambush had indeed struck at the moment when everyone was unprepared. The other party's timing was right when all the assassin organizations and lone travelers were laying low. Even the Four Seasons Tower, which had suffered heavy losses due to the series of events earlier, had thought that the other forces would not make any moves in the near future, at least for the next few days. However, this ambush had come so suddenly. It had caught everyone off guard, and the lineup was so formidable. Even if Yun Xiaoyao thought about it now, this force against Yun Yang alone would be like a mountain crushing down on him, like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Because of this, the other party's intention was simple and brutal, to kill with a single strike. To eliminate any future trouble. Yet, Yun Yang had managed to drag the battle to the very end in such a dire situation where there was absolutely no room for maneuver. It was only when their reinforcements had descended from the sky and surrounded the other party, wiping them out in one fell swoop. Yun Yang had even insisted on saying a few words before he fainted, unable to hold on any longer. The outcome was unbelievable, unimaginable, and appalling. It was beyond everyone's understanding. Yun Xiaoyao asked himself, if he had been in Yun Yang's shoes, would he have survived? Yun Xiaoyao had never been one to belittle himself. After he calmed himself down and weighed the pros and cons, he confirmed one thing: if he had been in Yun Yang's shoes, the other party would have gone back for a celebratory drink right now. There would be no accidents, no fluke. Thinking of this, Yun Xiaoyao could not help shuddering. On the other hand, Fang Mafei and Lao Mei remained composed, not even feeling that this matter was a legend or a myth. Looking at the crowd's shock, both of them were secretly pleased. Bunch of fools, what do you know? Young master, that supreme cloud we're talking about. Everything he does and everything he encounters is beyond the reach of others. Even if such a thing was not common, it was nothing more than a daily occurrence. The rise and fall of a million-strong army could be decided with just a word from him. What more these mere assassins in front of them? A piece of cake. What was there to be afraid of? Was this the truth? Of course not. Fang Mei and her brother's situation was different from the four noble young masters. Their personal worship of Yun Yang had reached the point of following him blindly. Whatever Yun Yang did, it was reasonable and unreasonable. There was no logic or common sense. This was the legendary fan filter, there was no logic to it. The assassins who had been captured were now all imprisoned in the secret room. They had just been tied up to a pillar when a series of painful moans sounded out incessantly. Everyone couldn't help but be puzzled. We're just tying up a person. We haven't even tortured him yet, but he's already crying out in pain. They're really losing face for the assassins. But when they looked carefully, they all shivered. Each of the captive assassins was covered with wounds all over their bodies. Strictly speaking, these wounds were not deep. They only scratched the skin and did not penetrate into the muscles and bones. They were typical skin injuries. In spite of this, the number of scars was too many and each of them was about the same depth. It was shocking. At this moment, all of them were tied to the pillars. As they struggled, the repercussions of the countless saber scars were exposed. The one who was in the worst condition initially did not seem to have suffered much damage, and his clothes seemed to be intact. However, as he struggled, his clothes were torn to shreds, and he was covered in blood from head to toe. It was as if his entire body was covered in blood. Everyone present had the same thought: this fellow was fated to die. He would die without a doubt. Just the blood alone would be enough to kill him. In spite of this, the person's cry was full of vigor, without a hint of weakness. It hurt so much, Fang Mafei took a closer look and realized that the bleeding on the fellow's body had stopped automatically. After all, he was a high-level cultivator. His recovery rate from purely superficial wounds was far faster than that of an ordinary person, but the knife marks were still glaring. After a careful count, this unlucky fellow had such shallow scratches on his body. Starting from his scalp, his face, his chest, his shoulders, all the way to his calves, there were at least 235 of them. No, there were also 7 on the soles of his feet. They were all fresh wounds, not old wounds. That meant, there were a total of 242 saber marks. This did not include the 30 overcuts on his boots that did not penetrate the boots. Otherwise, the number would be even more. Fang Mafei swallowed involuntarily. Did this guy get killed by 1,000 cuts? How did he do it? The legendary death by 1,000 cuts technique was probably at this level. Moreover, there was another advantage to these saber marks. It saved the need to bandage these fellows' wounds. A high-level cultivator would be able to recover from such shallow wounds in 2 to 3 days. Of course, the most important factor was that there was no way to bandage them, and there was no way to treat them. The person with the fewest saber marks had more than 80 on him. How should he bandage them? Even if he bandaged them like dumplings, there would still be some who slipped through the net. Instead of that, he might as well not bandage them. They would not die anyway. Young master's saber technique is really... Fang Mafei gasped in amazement. Amazing, just the saber marks on these people alone, young master must have slashed at least 2,000 times. If that's the case, in today's short battle, young master, Lao Mei took a deep breath, stunned by the number he thought of. The most conservative estimate would be, more than 30,000 cuts. Fang Mafei had given an inaccurate estimate, but he was shocked by the number as well. In such a short period of time, against an enemy several times stronger than him, he had unleashed at least 30,000 slashes without pause. Furthermore, Fang Mafei knew very well that under such circumstances, 30,000 slashes would not be enough to preserve his life and create such a result. That was the most conservative and minimum number. No wonder. Fang Mafei said dumbfoundedly. What? Lao Mei did not understand. Didn't you see? Fang Mafei was a little distracted. Our young master's muscles are strained. His wrists, arms, and shoulders, they're all swollen. His wrists are swollen to the point that they're thicker than his thighs. Lao Mei was speechless. Fang Mafei looked at Lao Mei with soulless eyes and said, "Is it hard to imagine? It's thicker than your waist." Lao Mei thought, F***CKU. Your father is just a little thinner. In Yun Yang's bedroom. Yun Yang lay quietly on the bed, snoring and completely unconscious. This was a deep slumber after extreme exhaustion, but it was different from deep slumber. It could be considered a recovery state of hibernation. Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu sat quietly on the bed, one at the head and the other at the foot. Yun Yang was really just overly fatigued. There was nothing else wrong with him and he did not suffer from any serious internal injuries. It was only after the two ladies had checked him over and over again that they were reassured and were able to keep watch over him peacefully. Chapter 649. Taking care of Yun Yang was not exactly ridiculous, but it was close enough. In spite of this, the two girls sat quietly. Initially, Shangguan Lingxiu had focused more of her attention on Yun Yang, but after making sure that Yun Yang was fine, she could not help shifting her attention to Ji Lingxi. She was shocked to realize that Ji Lingxi seemed to be very different from how she was previously. Her entire aura seemed to have undergone a drastic change. If she was not certain that the person before her was her best friend, it was hard to imagine how the same person could have such a different aura. Sister Lingxiu must have been frightened today. Ji Lingxi smiled gently. I've been too busy just now. I've neglected you. I'll go make tea for Sister Lingxiu. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled faintly. It's all right. With Yun Yang's protection today, I'm very safe. Perhaps you don't believe me, but I've never been worried about what happened today from the beginning to the end. Ji Lingxi said, Sister Lingxiu is generous indeed. It's a pity that this fool has fought so hard. Shangguan Lingxiu replied, this is another matter. Today's battle is a trivial matter of life and death to me. I've long been indifferent to it, but Yun Yang still has many concerns. Of course, he has to fight with all his might. Ji Lingxi smiled and said, Sister Lingxiu, you've seen through life and death and are open-minded. This little sister is just like this fool. I always think that it's better to be alive if I can. After all, only when I'm alive can I have the right to talk about the future. Shangguan Lingxiu's expression shifted slightly before returning to normal. Sister Lingxi is right. Of course, no one is willing to die if they can live. However, when it comes to a time where they have to choose between life and death, the choice has to be made eventually. Which is right and which is wrong, which is this and which is this. It's inevitable that they're stubborn. Ji Lingxi sighed and said, even if they're stubborn, they still have to see if it's worth it. Shangguan Lingxiu did not continue the conversation. She felt strange. Not only was Ji Lingxi's aura different today, her speech and behavior seemed to have changed as well. Her tongue was so sharp that Shangguan Lingxiu felt like she could not handle it. Even when Yu Rilan was still around, Shangguan Lingxiu had not felt that it was difficult to deal with these two women. In spite of this, Shangguan Lingxiu felt that she had nothing to say in response to Ji Lingxi's words today. Each and every one of them was laced with sarcasm. Shangguan Lingxiu was speechless while Ji Lingxi, who was sitting opposite her, felt uncomfortable as well. So what if Ji Lingxi had the upper hand in her argument? The reality was that Yun Yang had gone through thick and thin with Shangguan Lingxiu. He had even risked his life for Shangguan Lingxiu, resulting in him being severely injured. Even if he was not severely injured, he was still injured. Everyone could see how dangerous the situation was. Ji Lingxi was even more afraid than her heart ached. Naturally, she was disgusted by Shangguan Lingxiu. However, she sighed and said, Lingxiu's words. I Sister Yang I Yangs of the Yang of Lingxis. What he said was the truth. Ji Lingxi asked herself honestly, could she walk away if she were in the same situation, let alone Yun Yang? The only choice was to fight to the end like Yun Yang. Live and die together. There was no other choice. Similarly, if Shangguan Lingxiu had been in the same position, she would not have let go and only cared about escaping alone. It was because of this that Ji Lingxi realized that her previous words had been too unreasonable. Embarrassed, the young girl apologized and made amends. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled, not feeling offended at all as she replied, the main reason why you said that is because you're worried about young Master Yun's safety. How could I not know that? Why would you be angry at me over such a matter? Actually, you're very open-minded. So what if you say that you've seen through life and death? If you've really seen through life and death, what I should have done was to kill myself when the enemy's encirclement was just a way of saying that I would die if I was unwilling. How could Shangguan Lingxiu not understand Ji Lingxi's feelings? Both girls smiled at each other, no longer holding a grudge. Ji Lingxi glanced at Yun Yang who was lying on the bed, pursed her lips and sighed, saying, this fellow. You might say that he's unromantic, but he's quite, but you might say that he's a playboy. Sometimes, he's so wooden that it makes one want to beat him up. Even if you beat him to death, it won't be enough. How does he have the demeanor of Yutong's top popinjay? The last sentence was left unsaid in her heart. He's an unromantic piece of wood, but he's so good at flirting. For example, this lady in front of her, a heroine of her generation, was also captivated by this fellow. Shangguan Lingxiu blushed when she heard that and said faintly, actually, it's quite good that he's like this. It makes one feel at ease. Ji Lingxi sighed and glanced at Shangguan Lingxiu. She hesitated for a moment, the words circling in her mouth before she finally blurted them out. Sister Lingxiu, I heard that many people have gone to the Shangguan residence to propose marriage recently. I wonder, what are your plans, Sister Lingxiu? Shangguan Lingxiu looked at Shangguan Lingxiu. Shangguan Lingxiu's beautiful face dimmed for a moment. She smiled bitterly and said weakly, Sister, this is a good question. You really care about me? Ji Lingxi chuckled humorlessly as well and said, but this question can't be avoided. We have to face it eventually. Shangguan Lingxiu said in a low voice, how can I not know that this is unavoidable? I have to face it. I wonder how Sister Lingxi would choose and face it if you were in my position. Ji Lingxi sucked in a deep breath and said, Sister Lingxiu, there's no one else around now. Why don't we sisters have a heart-to-heart talk? Shangguan Lingxiu glanced at Yun Yang who was lying on the bed and said in a low voice, all right. Ji Lingxi said softly, to be honest, this younger sister understands Sister Lingxiu's situation very well. I can empathize with Sister Lingxiu's feelings and know them very well. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed softly. I have to say, Sister Lingxiu, you're carrying too much on your shoulders. It's too tiring. If I were in your shoes, if I were Sister Lingxiu. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth and said, if there's no such person in my heart, perhaps. I'll just choose someone who's most beneficial to my family and whom I think is passable to marry. Life in this world is but a spring for the plants and trees, a lifetime without a heart. So what? However, if there's such a person in my heart, how can I say that I have no heart? I think, my choice. Ji Lingxi's eyes were filled with a heartfelt anguish as she said, is perhaps. I'd rather carry all of this myself and move forward with the burden. I'll carry it for as long as I can. Shangguan Lingxiu lowered her head and nodded silently. What Ji Lingxi had said was exactly what Shangguan Lingxiu was thinking. Almost every word was exactly the same, exactly the same. She could only feel her heartstrings trembling. Unable to control herself, she was almost about to burst into tears on the spot to release the emotions that had been suppressed for so long. The toughness that she had been pretending to be was completely shattered by these few words. Therefore, I think Sister Lingxiu has probably decided to spend the rest of her life alone. Ji Lingxi sighed softly, a hint of pity flashing across her eyes. Chapter 650. Ji Lingxi knew that once a lady as beautiful as Shangguan Lingxiu had fallen in love, her desire would never waver and would never change for the rest of her life. Putting herself in Yun Yang's shoes, Shangguan Lingxiu could not care less about her reputation as a woman and expose herself to the public to drink with Yun Yang. It was already a great feat for her. Furthermore, her intentions were clear. The elders of the Shangguan family of generals who were still alive were all getting old, while the next generation of children and nephews had yet to grow up. At such a time, Shangguan Lingxiu, as the family's pillar of support, would never abandon her family for the sake of her marriage. As Yin Yang's cultivation base grew higher, his future would not be limited to the empire of Yutong. Who knew when he would leave, and disappear? Once Yin Yang left, it would be a long time before they could meet again. It was possible that they would never meet again. It was also possible that she would be an old woman by the time they met again. Instead of doing nothing, it was better for her to see him more, to have a meal more, to spend more time with him while she was still able to. If there came a day in the future, then these would be the memories of her life. After all, having something was better than having nothing at all. When this life was about to end and she was lying on her deathbed, recalling the past of her youth, at least in this life, she had loved him and we still had time to be alone. Ji Lingxi dared to guarantee that even if her guess was not entirely accurate, it was at least 80 to 90% correct. If she were in Shangguan Lingxiu's shoes, she would do the same. She would definitely do the same. She might even be more brazen than Shangguan Lingxiu, even more daring. Shangguan Lingxiu lowered her head and kept quiet for a long time. Finally, she lifted her head to look at Ji Lingxi and said softly, "That's right. Every single word that Sister Lingxi said is right. Every single word and every single sentence is what I'm thinking." She paused for a moment before continuing, "That's all I'm thinking about right now. Don't you think it's silly?" Ji Lingxi looked at her in a daze, not knowing where to start. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled calmly. In the empire of Yutong, ordinary women get married when they turn 16. Many of them are already mothers when they're 17 or 18. I'm already 22 years old this year. Wait until the oldest of my 6 nephews can understand the ways of the world and take over part of the family's heavy responsibilities. At the very least, wait until he is 14 or 15 years old. But my oldest nephew is only 9 years old this year. In other words, Shangguan Lingxiu said in a low voice, "At the very least, I'll have to wait another 6 years before I can start trying to let it go. Even if it's 5 years. I'll be 27 years old by then. Actually, even if it really comes to that, can I really let it go? As for my nephew's side, no matter what, I still have to support him a little longer. Only when he can truly shoulder the heavy responsibility of the Shangguan family and become a qualified heir of the Shangguan family of generals, can I truly let go of the burden on my shoulders. That period of support should last at least a year. But at that time, I would be at least 28 years old." Shangguan Lingxiu smiled bitterly as she looked at Ji Lingxi. "Lingxi, do you know that an unmarried woman at the age of 28, in the empire of Yutong, is already considered a middle-aged woman? When that time comes, it would be difficult for me to find someone to marry even if I don't have anyone I like. Those who match my age would already have wives and concubines. I look down even less on teenagers who are 15 or 16 years old. They're too childish after all. Actually, most of those teenagers wouldn't want to be as old as I am. If I really want to start a family in the future, I can only find those widowed men in their 30s or 40s. This is almost my only choice. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled faintly. Instead of choosing such a fate, why not spend the rest of my life alone? What do you think? Ji Lingxi could not help but nod in agreement. Indeed, if that was the case, it would be better to spend the rest of her life alone. So, I'm not a threat to you, Shangguan Lingxiu said bitterly. Shangguan Lingxiu spoke bitterly. Her heart shattered into pieces after she uttered those words, unable to be mended. She paused before continuing, I won't deny that I like Yun Yang, but I'm not a threat to you, not even the slightest bit. Ji Lingxi blushed and sighed softly. She walked over to hold Shangguan Lingxiu's hand and said seriously, Sister Lingxiu, you've misunderstood the intention of my conversation with you. Listen to me first. Shangguan Lingxiu stared at her blankly as her hand was held. Ji Lingxi swallowed with difficulty and said, Actually, you and I both know that since the beginning of time, men have had multiple wives and concubines throughout the ages, but women like you and I have never been willing to share our man with another woman. When she mentioned the words man, Ji Lingxi's blushing face turned even redder. After all, she was still a virgin. When she suddenly said these words, the shyness she felt was like an ocean or a tide that was difficult to suppress. Shangguan Lingxiu nodded in a daze. She really had no idea what Ji Lingxi was trying to say. I'm not willing to do this either, said Ji Lingxi. No matter how good, how outstanding, and how remarkable this woman is, I'm still not willing. Even if the world is like this and the customs are like this, I still won't agree to it. My man should only belong to me. He will only belong to me. Ji Lingxi said resolutely. Shangguan Lingxiu said softly, You don't have to say anything more. I understand. I really do. She thought to herself, if it were me, I wouldn't be willing either. We're all women. Is it really necessary to say these things over and over again? Is this showing off? Ji Lingxi's chest heaved violently. She gripped Shangguan Lingxiu's hand tightly and said, But, there's an uncontrollable situation now. Shangguan Lingxiu was at a loss. Uncontrollable? What uncontrollable situation? What do you mean by that? Ji Lingxi's eyes were tinged with embarrassment, but she continued boldly, I mean, if, when the time comes. Sister Lingxiu, you can hand over the responsibility, if I still can't do that. Chapter 651. It took a while for Shangguan Lingxiu to understand the true meaning of Ji Lingxi's stuttering words. However, as soon as the realization dawned on her, her body trembled. She lifted her head and stared at Ji Lingxi in disbelief. To be together forever. Shangguan Lingxiu knew very well what this meant. I don't quite understand what you mean. Shangguan Lingxiu blushed as she stuttered, wringing her hands in embarrassment. It was not that she did not quite understand, she understood it all too well. Ji Lingxi's words had been condescending from the very beginning. At least to her, it sounded like she was advising her to give up and declaring her attitude, this man is mine. You have no chance. Give up while it's still early. However, the last sentence was so earth-shattering that it had forcefully reversed the situation. This was the so-called divine reversal. The more it was so, the more Shangguan Lingxiu dared not believe it. It did not make sense. How could she not be controlled? How could she? Ji Lingxi's face was suddenly contorted in pain and helplessness. Even her lips were turning pale. Of course I have my reasons. If it wasn't because I had no other choice, why would I have to make such a compromise? Sister Lingxiu, please believe me. If there was even the slightest possibility, I wouldn't have agreed to it. I wouldn't have said so. Shangguan Lingxiu's heart wrenched as worry crept into her face. She lowered her voice and asked anxiously, What's wrong with you? Is there something wrong with your body? This was the only reasonable explanation for Ji Lingxi's current choice. Ji Lingxi shook her head slowly. Shangguan Lingxiu frowned and said anxiously, "You have to talk about it first before we can talk about it. How can you solve it if you keep it to yourself?" She was genuinely worried for Ji Lingxi now. What exactly was the reason that could make such a proud and arrogant woman willingly give up on her own lover? Shangguan Lingxiu could not think of a reason no matter how hard she racked her brain. Judging from Ji Lingxi's behavior, it was Ji Lingxi who was in trouble. It had nothing to do with Yun Yang. Moreover, it was a serious matter, so serious that Ji Lingxi could only sigh helplessly. Then, how could this be a small matter? How could Shangguan Lingxiu not worry? Ji Lingxi's face flushed, then paled, then reddened, then paled again. After the cycle repeated a dozen times, she finally said hatefully, I must have been harmed by that old thing in my house. That old thing in your house? Shangguan Lingxiu was confused. Who is it then? How did he harm you? The old man who gave birth to me but didn't raise me. It's fine if he didn't, but he loved me so much. Sigh. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth and said fiercely. At this point, Ji Lingxi's long sigh was truly heart-wrenching. She was utterly speechless and helpless. Then, he was really speechless. He was speechless for a long time. Shangguan Lingxiu was dumbfounded, obviously confused by a certain someone's random narration. What does that mean? Why can't I understand a single word? What was going on? Sigh. Ji Lingxi sighed one after another while Shangguan Lingxiu could not help scratching her head, her eyes filled with confusion. After some time, Ji Lingxi bit her lip and came over shyly, whispering into Shangguan Lingxiu's ear, Sigh, I can't say it. This is. Shangguan Lingxiu covered her red lips with one hand as she looked at Ji Lingxi. The look in her eyes was either curious, amused, incredulous, or inexplicably shocked. All in all, it was hard to describe the myriad of emotions in her eyes. Ji Lingxi felt like her face was burning. Say. I really don't know how long this will last. I don't even know if I'll be able to see this old thing again. How do I get rid of it? If you can't get rid of it, say. Ji Lingxi's expression turned gloomy again as she sighed faintly, looking forlorn. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed as well. She was helpless about this, and speechless. It was the first time she had heard of such a thing since the beginning of time. The old man's protection of his daughter was so tight that she could not even find a husband. Who would be willing to find a wife who would be bedridden for 2 months with just a hug and a kiss? There was no need to even think about the next step. Ji Lingxi had been an orphan since she was young. Who her parents were, where they were now, and whether they could be found in the future, all of these were still undetermined. How could the prohibition be lifted? If it could not be lifted, what could be done? Could it be that Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi could only look at each other with a bench's distance for the rest of their lives? Would they continue to look at each other like this? There would not even be a possibility of lying on the same bed. Just thinking about it made one feel that it was strange, and also a great sorrow, right? Has it always been like this? Nothing has changed. Shangguan Lingxiu did not know what expression she should be wearing now. Ji Lingxi did not know what expression she should be wearing either. Sigh. Because of this, Yun Yang has lain on the bed 3 times, intentionally or not. Cough, cough, cough. Shangguan Lingxiu choked subconsciously and began coughing violently. Ji Lingxi's face was flushed. Don't misunderstand. It was just a coincidence. Sigh. How should I put this? Although it's still too early. I don't want to give myself up just like that, but, how should I put this? Pfft. Shangguan Lingxiu really did not want to laugh. She knew that she should not laugh at this moment, but for some reason, she could not control herself and was convulsing with laughter. You! Ji Lingxi was enraged and sat aside with a pout. After a while, she could not help but burst out laughing as well. As she laughed, she sighed heavily. This matter was really inexplicable. Shangguan Lingxiu finally understood Ji Lingxi's thoughts. You can't do anything, you're reduced to a decorative vase, yet you're still hogging it and not letting anyone else touch it. How unreasonable is that? Just because you like it, you'll be an old virgin for the rest of your life. Does that mean the man you like has to be an old virgin as well? He still has to carry on the family line. Can you do it? Ji Lingxi had no choice but to make such a compromise. Ha ha ha, Shangguan Lingxiu covered her mouth, trembling with laughter. Ji Lingxi was extremely embarrassed. I'm worried to death and you're still laughing, worried to death. Shangguan Lingxiu chuckled again. Very worried indeed, very anxious. Ji Lingxi grew even more embarrassed. She pounced on Shangguan Lingxiu and the two girls tangled together. After a long time, Shangguan Lingxiu begged helplessly, "My dear sister, let me go." Ji Lingxi refused to let go, tickling Shangguan Lingxiu continuously. At this time, a confused voice called out, "What are you two doing?" Both girls froze at the same time. Turning to look, they saw that Yun Yang had already woken up and was looking at them with a puzzled expression. His eyes were filled with bewilderment. How did these two girls become so close when he was unconscious? Chapter 652. It's none of your business. Shut up. Shut up. The two girls bellowed at Yun Yang in unison, their auras surging and unstoppable. Yun Yang's neck was turned to the side and he coughed forcefully to dissolve the awkward atmosphere, still confused. What's wrong? How did I offend them? He did not know that it was because he had not offended the two girls that they could only choose the most violent and unreasonable way to treat him. Otherwise, how could they dissolve the awkward atmosphere? What if someone saw through them? Yun Yang wanted to leave this seemingly hostile place. He raised his arm with great effort but groaned immediately. His physical exhaustion was secondary, his right arm was so swollen that it was unbearably painful. The moment he raised his arm, Yun Yang almost thought that he had lifted his thigh, the thickest part at that. This. Forget it, it's more important to cultivate and recuperate. Yun Yang, who had just closed his eyes and cultivated the endless divine art, widened his eyes again. What is going on? Am I dreaming? Even if it was a dream, it was a beautiful dream. Yun Yang's endless divine art had actually broken through. The fourth stage. The surging spiritual chi was like tangible threads that swam in his meridians at a steady and fast pace. Furthermore, the feeling that the threads gave Yun Yang was actually thick, solid, and resilient. Good and evil shall be repaid with 10,000 heads, the pillar of blood shall be severed from the middle stream, the noble spirit of the human realm shall be preserved, the 4 golden lotuses shall guard for the king. Yun Yang was stupefied. When did I do it? Have I really killed 10,000 villains? Why don't I feel anything about this? Aya, Emmy's clear, childish cry that it had not heard for a long time came from the space. Its voice was filled with agitation and excitement. In short, it was a cry of joy and joy. Yin Yang then remembered that his deific consciousness space had been reopened. Had Emmy, whom he had not seen for a long time, returned to his embrace? This explosive news made Yun Yang even more elated than the breakthrough of the endless divine art. Once he thought about it, he could not wait to immerse himself in it. As far as his divine sense could see, the space was filled with huge and shocking changes. First of all, the entire space had expanded by at least 4 times as much as before. Other than the plant that had grown to a height of 10 feet, there were also leaves so green that they were almost black and thick and tough vines that were hundreds of feet long. It was a sight to behold. As for the bottom 3 leaves, the area of each leaf was about half the size of a house. It would be a piece of cake to hold them up to shelter them from the wind and rain. Taking a closer look, the soft thorns on the plant's leaves, roots, and stalks looked sharper now, glinting with a cold glint. Yin Yang subconsciously felt a chill run down his spine as he took a look. Was this a lotus or a cactus? This thorn, of course. What surprised Yun Yang the most was that at the top of Emmy's body, there was a newly grown, tender leaf that was swaying with the wind. The new leaf had yet to fully grow, only the size of a palm. Its tip was even curled, with a few drops of dew hanging on it. It was verdant and extremely adorable. Four-leaf golden lotus. Yin-yang heaved a long sigh of relief. It had finally grown. The deific consciousness space had finally been reopened. Only God knew how much suffering Yin-yang had gone through during this period of time and how much psychological pressure he had endured. He was truly afraid that the space would disappear or that he would never be able to contact it again, never to be reopened again. Now, however, this greatest fear, this gloom, had become a thing of the past, a thing of history, no longer existing. Yin-yang understood something more from this incident. Whether the space was sealed or not, the karmic chi of good and evil would not stop being absorbed as long as the wicked were killed. As for the karmic chi of good and evil from the endless divine art, it had never stopped. Although he couldn't contact the space, everything he had been doing during this period of time was to practice his martial arts. He had killed quite a number of people during this period of time, and the quality seemed to be rather high as well. As he thought about it, he suddenly felt his body tighten. A few vines had already wrapped themselves around him tightly. Emmy sprinted over happily and plunged into Yin-yang's embrace. Sprinted over. Yin-yang hugged Emmy along the way, filled with joy. It was only after a while that he noticed something odd. Emmy was like a child, pulling its roots out of the soil and transforming into two legs as it sprinted over. What the F***ck, what new ability is this? It's too strange. Yin-yang was dumbstruck. Since when did this little fellow have such a strange ability? Was it a tree ant or a vegetable? Emmy's leaves caressed and rubbed against Yin-yang's body, an indescribable sense of intimacy. It was like a young daughter who had been separated from her father for a long time, hugging her long-lost father and refusing to let go. Ay-ay-ay-ay, Yin-yang was beaming as he hugged Emmy. Emmy's spikes were extremely soft when it hugged Yin-yang, crying out coquettishly without stopping. Yin-yang carefully deciphered Emmy's words, word by word. The smile on his face grew wider, his mouth almost crooked from the wide grin. I've missed you so much. Wah, wah. That's great. Why are you taking so long? I'm going to ignore you if you don't come. Have you seen how much I've grown during this period of time? Look at this leaf, look at me, I've grown taller, so tall and big. Although there was not much substance to it, Yin-yang's heart softened when he heard it. Pressing Emmy's leaves against his face, feeling the gentleness that came from the bottom of his heart and the childish coolness, Yin-yang's smile grew warmer. It was like a father hugging his infatuated daughter, as if he was hugging the whole world, unwilling to let her go. Meow, 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 meow. Two meows filled with grievance and disappointment rang out one after another. Yin-yang lowered his head, feeling even more ecstatic. Beside his feet were two snow-white fur balls. The little things that were no bigger than a palm were looking up at him with eyes filled with grievance. They meowed as if complaining, "Master, why did you only see Emmy? Why did you ignore us? We've waited for you for so long as well." Chapter 653. Yin-yang chortled and hugged the two fellows whom he had not seen for a long time. Without a word, they burrowed into Yin-yang's embrace and stuck themselves comfortably against his skin, not moving an inch. To them, this was the place they were most familiar with, a place they had not seen for a long time. Old dreams replayed, lingering endlessly. Yin-yang caressed the two fellows lightly. The two fellows were extremely satisfied, snoring comfortably in their throats while their ears fluttered. Their furry tails swayed back and forth, sometimes standing straight up like a flagpole, sometimes curling into a ball of fur, and sometimes swaying back and forth like a pendulum. Yin-yang observed them carefully, worried, to make sure that Whitey 2 and Whitey 3's injuries were completely healed and that there was no longer any hidden danger. In addition, Yin-yang realized that not only were Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 fully healed, they had even advanced. What was even more ridiculous was that they had advanced not just by 1 or 2 levels, but by 3 or 4 levels. Yin-yang was surprised to find out that he could not see through the two Whiteys' current level at all. Could Could it be that these two furry little fellows' battle prowess has already surpassed mine? Was it possible? Surely not. No matter what, at the very least, compared to the three whiteys at home, these two whiteys' cultivation base had surpassed the eldest, and their level had increased significantly as well. Could it be that they can improve faster in the space? Otherwise, how could they have advanced so quickly? Yin Yang pondered while stroking his chin. If that's the case, I should arrange for the other three whiteys to come in and improve themselves as soon as possible. We're brothers after all, it wouldn't be good if there's a difference in our abilities. Chirp chirp. A crisp chirp could be heard. Yin Yang frowned and looked towards the source of the sound. A tiny bird was hovering in front of him, its two round eyes looking at him with a tilted head. Its gaze was filled with friendliness, but of course, there was also a hint of disdain for competing with the two whiteys. Chirp chirp, compared to Whitey, Yin Yang had almost forgotten about this fellow. Seeing its arrival, he quickly beckoned for Gigi to land on his palm. After observing it carefully for a moment, he asked with a frown, Gigi, what's wrong with you? Both of them have improved so much, but why haven't you grown any fur? Are you slacking off and not cultivating properly? Chirp 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 chirp. Gigi chirped again, tilted its head, and put on a look that was even more disdainful than before. The general meaning was, this lord is a divine beast, how can advancing be as easy as these two idiots? The two whiteys were enraged when they heard that. They dashed out at a speed faster than Yin Yang could react and pinned Ha under their bodies, ravaging it. Even though it was a divine beast, it was still very young, not to mention, whether or not it was a divine beast still remained to be verified. Gigi shrieked and struggled with all its might. After a while, it finally escaped from under the two whiteys and flew to Yin Yang, flapping its bare wings. Then, it made a move. One of its wings flapped while the other drooped down, pointing the tip of its wing at the two whiteys. Its eyes were on Yin Yang, and its expression was fierce and its words were hurried as it chirped angrily. It was obvious that he was complaining about the two white beasts' terrible behavior of bullying the divine beasts by waving their hands and feet and chattering. This fellow had really grown up. He even knew how to snitch on others. Yin Yang could not help but feel amused. As for the personal grudges between the two of you, Yin Yang said seriously, I won't interfere. You can settle it yourselves. Hearing this, Haji immediately became dejected and discouraged. The two whiteys, on the other hand, were full of arrogance and high-spirited. Ayya, an angry cry rang out like an alarm. Emmy was furious. Today was supposed to be a joyous day of reunion, but these three fellows still wanted to fight amongst themselves. Can't you be a little more promising and have some face? Did they know that their actions were going to piss off your boss? Ayya, Emmy roared agitatedly, basically saying, whoever fights again will be chased out and never allowed to enter again. With this threat, the three of them instantly gave up and became as obedient as they could be. They were as cute and adorable as they could be, as adorable as they could be. To them, entering this space to cultivate was a great thing. How could they not be allowed to enter? Who knew how long it would take for them to improve so much if they were to cultivate outside? After a long while of excitement, Yin Yang finally remembered to check on his current situation. When he first activated the power of the fourth tier of the endless divine art, Yin Yang felt as if he was invincible in this world. This was, of course, an illusion. However, it was just an illusion. The huge improvement brought about by this advancement still made Yin Yang feel as if he had been reborn. This was the real deal, the real deal. Firstly, his cultivation base had increased tremendously. It had soared to the third tier of Tao realm, and it was even the pinnacle of the third tier. This was already a huge surprise, but what surprised Yin Yang even more was that 2 more chakras had been awakened in his body. Initially, it was already unprecedented in Tianxian continent for him to have 10 awakened chakras. After the prolonged battle with the assassins, he had managed to awaken his chakras at the final stage, bringing the total number of chakras to 12. It was something that was beyond the knowledge of any cultivator in this world. Now, he had awakened another one, making it a total of 14 chakras. What kind of situation was this? Was it even more extraordinary than the world, even more extraordinary than what was known to the world? Yin-Yang was overwhelmed with surprise and bewilderment. 9 chakras was already the limit for people in Tianxian continent, but what was going on with 14 awakened chakras? What was going on? What kind of situation was this? Furthermore, if things continued like this, would Big Brother's chakras continue to be awakened as he progressed to the 5th and 6th level? How many could he awaken in the end? Furthermore, how many chakras could be awakened in a human body? Initially, Yin-Yang had thought that 10 chakras was already the limit. After all, there were only 10 holes on a person's body: 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, mouth, belly button, cough, and the front and the back. That, Yin-Yang had scoffed at the original theory of 9 chakras. He had researched this principle himself. It was on the day he awakened 10 chakras that Yin-Yang had realized it and called it a unique secret. Now, however, Yin-Yang realized that his so-called realization and unique secret back then were all bullshit. Forget it, let's not think about this troublesome problem for now. No matter how unimaginable the current situation was, it was still a good thing. He checked his body condition again and again, confirming that the circulation speed of his essential energy was at least 10 times faster than before. The purity of his mystical chi was also a few times better than before. As for the specific and precise degree of improvement, it could only be confirmed after seeing the actual combat effect. Amidst the huge improvement in his cultivation base, the reopening of the space, and the reappearance of Emmy, Yin-Yang was even more pleased with the fact that his old partner, his most beloved weapon, the divine edge, had finally returned to his hands. He had almost forgotten that the breakthrough in his cultivation base also meant that Saber Truth, Destiny Blade, would reveal a new brilliance and a new killing move. The long-awaited 4th form of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade, was still a form with 2 styles. The first style, Wind Beyond the Sky; the second style, Mountain of White Bones. Chapter 654. The 4th style, Saber Truth, Destiny Blade, was different from the first 3 styles of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade's offense and defense. It was flawless and sharp. This style and 2 styles were pure killing moves. It was a stunning strike from an unparalleled assassin, filled with boundless killing intent. Wind Beyond the Sky was a killing move that came out of nowhere. This style was targeted at an enemy who was fighting alone. It was full of surprises and was impossible to defend against. Of course, the style was not without its flaws. When it was executed, the mystical energy of the entire body had to be unleashed in a single blow. This brought about a negative side effect. Whether the move hit its target or not, a considerable amount of mystical chi would be expended. As for the second style, Mountain of White Bones, it reflected the power of the style and its killing intent. Once the style was executed, only a mountain of white bones would remain, no matter how many enemies there were in front of it. In spite of this, the killing intent of the style and 2 styles was already shocking to Yin-Yang just by looking at it. The other point was the mantra of the style. Wind Beyond the Sky rises in the cold of the mortal world, the concourse of the underworld is built under the saber. These 3 words, concourse of the underworld, Yin-Yang could not help but connect the dots. Was this just a coincidence with the assassin organization, the concourse of the underworld? This was truly thought-provoking and thought-provoking. At this time, Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 began to target Yin-Yang's crotch together, raising their heads and mewling pleadingly, obviously wanting to go out. It had been a long time since they had left home. How could they not miss it? Previously, the space was locked and they could not do anything about it. Now that they had seen their master again, it meant that they could return to the world. How could they not be tempted? They had not seen their brothers for such a long time. Although Yin-Yang was still immersed in the new realm, he did not think much of it and simply waved his hand in agreement. Go out yourself. When Shangguan Lingxiu and Ji Lingxi saw that Yin-Yang had woken up, they looked awkward and their tone was fiery. but they were actually overjoyed. Seeing that he had only said a few words before he began to cultivate, how could they not know that Yun Yang had been severely injured this time? They would not disturb him, quietly waiting for him to wake up for the second time. Lingxi, look at his arm. Shangguan Lingxiu stared worriedly at Yun Yang's shoulder that was swollen to the point where it was thicker than his thigh. Ji Lingxi was unconcerned. She took a casual glance and said, if an ordinary person were to swell up like this, his arm would probably be crippled. However, an ace mystical cultivator's physique and self-recovery ability are incomparable to an ordinary person's. Yin Yang's cultivation method is focused on nourishing the body and blood, so he'll definitely be fine. There's a limit to what we can do about his condition. Whether it's using our mystical qi cultivation base or medicinal herbs to promote blood circulation and disperse blood clots, we can only alleviate the condition slightly. It's difficult to completely cure the symptoms. On the other hand, if Yin Yang were to use his own mystical qi to restore this arm to its original state, not only would it not be damaged, the tendons and meridians of this arm would be enhanced greatly instead. This is actually a good thing for him. Oh, I see. Shangguan Lingxiu nodded, completely relieved. After a while, Yun Yang was still immersed in a deep state of recuperation. Seeing that Yun Yang did not move for a long time, the two ladies who were unwilling to be left out turned to chat in low voices. Ji Lingxi, who had just changed the topic, turned her head unintentionally and her eyes suddenly bulged. Shangguan Lingxiu followed Ji Lingxi's gaze. Huh. Yun Yang, who was lying on the ground, had his swollen arm and shoulder shrunk significantly, almost resembling a human's. As the two ladies continued to stare at him, the swelling was diminishing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It had shrunk once more. It had shrunk once more. It had shrunk once more. Then, it returned to its normal state. Ji Lingxi, who had witnessed the entire process, was so shocked that her eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Shangguan Lingxiu might not have experienced Yun Yang's swelling before, but Ji Lingxi had experienced it many times and was well aware of the changes in his condition. From what Ji Lingxi knew, even if it was not as horrifying as Yun Yang's, it would still take at least 5 to 6 days to recover. Although he had spoken to Shangguan Lingxiu in a nonchalant manner, he was actually trying to comfort her. Based on Ji Lingxi's understanding of Yun Yang's swelling, it would take at least half a month or even a month for him to fully recover. Now, however, Yun Yang's arm that was so swollen that it did not resemble a human's had completely gone. What is going on? This is unbelievable. Ji Lingxi stretched her hand out to touch Yun Yang's arm, murmuring as if she was dreaming. Shangguan Lingxiu was nervous as she watched. She swallowed and said, Lingxi, is it all right for you to touch him? In other words, why was there no light? Huh? Ji Lingxi turned her head. She was initially puzzled by Shangguan Lingxiu's question, but she understood immediately. She blushed and said awkwardly, I touched him. I touched him. Oh, Sister Lingxiu, you're really... What are you talking about? Shangguan Lingxiu was speechless. You're allowed to touch him, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. Ji Lingxi blushed furiously. I'm not allowed to. Sister Lingxiu, why don't you come and touch him as well? I'm not seeing things, am I? Shangguan Lingxiu was obviously worried as well. She extended her hand to touch it, pressing and pinching it before she said, the swelling has really gone down. The muscles are firm again. This feeling is real. After confirming this, the two girls were once again at a loss. What is going on? How can it recover so quickly? The two women could be considered to be knowledgeable people, but they had never seen the swelling go down so quickly and so nimbly. Just as the two girls were feeling suspicious, they were shocked to see Yun Yang's abdomen seemed to be slightly bulging. Both girls' eyes widened at once. That place bulged up bit by bit, as if something was slowly wriggling in that position. The two girls blushed and spat inwardly, but then they realized that the reason for the change in the position was different from what they had imagined. It was even stranger, the reason why the two girls came up with a different conclusion was that the bulging lump didn't stop at its initial position. Instead, it was gradually moving upwards, swimming all the way up. Finally, under the girls' dumbfounded gazes, a furry little head popped out from Yun Yang's robe. Its timid eyes darted around before it raised its head and meowed, meow. Hearing the meow, the two girls were petrified. For pretty eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. From his abdomen, it began to move, and then, a palm-sized kitten crawled out. Shangguan Lingxiu was so shocked that her vision darkened. Her breathing quickened as she stuttered. He actually gave birth to a cat. Ji Lingxi stared blankly as well. This is more than that. Yun Yang's abdomen had begun to wriggle for the second time. Then, it continued to move upwards like before, and finally, meow. Another kitten the size of a palm crawled out of the hole. Could they be twins? Chapter 655. Oh, for a moment, Ji Lingxi felt her vision darken. Her body swayed, unable to maintain itself. Shangguan Lingxiu hurried over to support her. Both girls only had one thought in their minds. Were they in a nightmare? Their minds were filled with a cacophony of noises. Ji Lingxi was thinking, I thought he couldn't do that. Turns out, he can actually give birth on his own. But why is he giving birth to cats? Shangguan Lingxiu was thinking, could this Yun Yang be a cat that has turned into a demon? And he should be a female cat? Otherwise, how could she have given birth to a pair of kittens, and a pair of twins at once? The two kittens could be confirmed to be twins with a single glance. There was no doubt about it. How absurd is this? Compared to the two girls' confusion, the two cats were not bewildered. After all, to Whitey 2 and Whitey 3, both Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu were their master's acquaintances. Naturally, they were unconcerned when they saw the two of them. When they returned to the mortal world again, they only meowed twice to greet him. Then, they wagged their tails and jumped down from a certain someone's body. Their snow-white little bodies were like two little pom-poms rolling down from the bed, stunning and pleasing to the eye. They rubbed themselves against Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu's thighs intimately and familiarly before walking out, wagging their tails and wagging their heads. It was as if no one else was around. Meow, 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 with a few cheerful meows, Big Whitey, Whitey 4, Whitey 5, and Whitey Big dashed over, the 5 snow-white pom-poms rolling around in a ball of joy. Ji Lingxi mumbled unconsciously, so it's Whitey 2 and Whitey 3. It was only when she finished that she exclaimed, it's Whitey 2 and Whitey 3? Shangguan Lingxiu asked dizzily, what? What Whitey? Actually, Shangguan Lingxiu had seen a few Whiteys a long time ago. She had even interacted with them during her trip to the Empire of Zio, but she had never seen Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 in their current state. It was probably because what she had seen was too shocking that her train of thought had gone off the rails, resulting in her current state of confusion. These two aren't Yun Yangs. Ji Lingxi did not know whether to laugh or to cry. She covered her forehead with her hand, feeling that she had made a huge blunder. These two are actually Yun Yang's pets. There are a few of them. They're not just twins, they're twins. Shangguan Lingxiu recognized it immediately as well. She blushed and coughed twice, speechless for a moment. The two women looked at each other, their eyes filled with the embarrassment on each other's faces. What was I thinking just now? I actually thought that these two little things were Yun Yang's. Could he have given birth to them? And what the hell was that cat spirit? And what the hell was a female cat? This train of thought, this brain hole, it was simply, it's just that, when did these two little things get on the bed? Why didn't we notice? Why did they burrow into Yun Yang's clothes, and in that position? Shangguan Lingxiu asked in surprise. Ji Lingxi's eyes darted around as she giggled. Sister Lingxiu was so focused on her lover just now that she probably didn't see anything else. Shangguan Lingxiu was embarrassed and said, You little girl, your mouth is full of filthy words. You're the one who's spouting nonsense. Yun Yang was still immersed in his new realm and had yet to truly wake up. Therefore, Shangguan Lingxiu and Ji Lingxi sat until dinner before they finally agreed to go eat. Let's go eat first. This fellow should be fine after dinner. Coincidentally, the two ladies were in the midst of eating. A silhouette flashed by the door. Yun Yang walked in clean, looking like a starving ghost. Oh, I'm starving to death. Why didn't you two greet me when you came to eat? Under the two ladies' dumbfounded gaze, Yun Yang devoured the table full of dishes. The entire process only took a few breaths. What are you two looking at? Serve the dishes quickly. Yun Yang felt like he had become a bottomless pit once again, the long-awaited state of hunger returning. His stomach felt like it could never be filled, it was so empty that he could eat a dragon. Therefore, the residents of Yun's chefs were all busy. Fortunately, a significant portion of the residents of Yun's chefs were experienced and had a rather deep impression of Yun Yang's gluttonous state. Even if they were not able to cope with it easily, they were not flustered, they were still methodical and had a few tricks up their sleeves. Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu watched as Yun Yang gobbled down 3 whole tables of food before he put down his chopsticks. Yun Yang, are you full? Ji Lingxi swallowed. The corners of her lips twitched as she looked at the 16 empty plates on the table. This was the 3rd table, including the one in front. It was already the 4th table. I'm full. Yun Yang was slightly embarrassed as he held his belly and chuckled dryly. Why aren't you two eating? Eating? The corners of the two girls' mouths twitched. Forget about eating, we're already full just from looking at him. We want to puke now, we're not hungry, the two girls said in unison. Yun Yang, are your injuries healed? Shangguan Lingxiu asked with concern. Yes, they're all healed. Healed? All healed? Really? Shangguan Lingxiu was rather worried. Don't worry, he's really all healed. Ji Lingxi squinted at him. Not only that, his cultivation base has improved a lot too. Don't you think so, great young master Yun, great expert Yun? Yun Yang squinted as well. Not exactly, but not far. Perhaps I'm not a great expert, but... Great young lady Ji, I'm not afraid of you now. Ji Lingxi stood up gracefully. You say you're not afraid, but what about your body? Why don't you try? Let's try. Yun Yang had the same intention. Ji Lingxi had been tormenting him for the past few days. She had been beaten the entire time. How could he miss the rare opportunity to retaliate? His cultivation base has improved tremendously. He would definitely teach this little girl a lesson. Just as Ji Lingxi was about to leave, Shangguan Lingxiu pulled on her sleeve. You try. I want to see, to confirm it with my own eyes. Ji Lingxi was speechless. Sister, is this a deliberate confirmation? Do you have to be so hesitant? It's like you're up to something. On the drill ground. Come on. Ji Lingxi was calm and composed. Yun Yang guffawed, feeling the surging energy in his body. He was already confident that he would win. With his arms behind his back, he pretended to be indifferent like a master and said, Lingxi, you have to deal with it properly this time. Be more careful. My cultivation base has improved tremendously now. I'm afraid that I won't be able to hold back and hurt you by mistake. Ji Lingxi snorted. I'll send you flying with one move. Ha 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 ha. Amidst the laughter, a purple silhouette flashed. Yun Yang had already charged over like a bolt of lightning, tearing the space apart in a flash. Both his hands glowed like white jade as he slammed them down on Ji Lingxi's shoulders. Shangguan Lingxiu watched on anxiously from the side. Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi's current level of ability had long surpassed Shangguan Lingxiu's knowledge. However, the simplest and most direct exchange of blows was still within the scope of observation. Of course, this was also because both of them had yet to unleash their maximum speed. Otherwise, Shangguan Lingxiu would only be able to see 2 balls of light. Ji Lingxi snorted. She really wanted to try and see if Yun Yang could dispel the mysterious red light after his advancement. Taking 2 steps back, he suddenly raised his head and bent his body backwards. Not only did Yun Yang's palm that was initially aimed at Ji Lingxi's shoulders deviate from his original intention, but it was also aimed at Ji Lingxi's perky chest instead. Cough. Chapter 656. Swoosh. Yun Yang's palm landed on Ji Lingxi's chest. The touch of his palm, he felt, just a little, boom. A beam of red light flashed as expected. A certain someone who had been full of confidence due to his improved cultivation base was flung away like a kite with a broken string. Boom, 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 a certain someone broke 2 flowering trees in succession before he fell onto the courtyard wall with a loud bang. Looking over, a certain someone's mouth and eyes were already crooked, and blood was flowing out of his 7 orifices. His 4 limbs were stuck to the wall like an octopus. After a while, he slid down with a schwa sound. His condition was so miserable that one could not bear to look at it. Shangguan Lingxiu cried out involuntarily when she saw what had happened. Ji Lingxi, on the other hand, looked dejected and sad. It's still not enough. My ability is still far from enough. On the other side, Yun Yang struggled with all his might and raised his head with a lingering breath. He said angrily, You, what do you mean by this? Only then did his head tilt as he fainted. Poor me, how long have I just woken up? I was only in high spirits for such a short while. Yun Yang had thought about what he would do after he woke up from his advancement this time, how he would do it, for example, charging to Sir Bai's side and catching him off guard. The 9th heaven realm and the 3rd heaven of Dao realm were 2 entirely different things. They were 2 entirely different concepts, especially to Yun Yang, who possessed the ability to kill someone of a higher level. After all, Sir Bai had long had an idea of Yun Yang's ability. The intelligence that Yun Yang was currently only at 9th heaven realm and he had been holding on with all his might while being surrounded by so many assassins, such a bloody fact was enough to dispel anyone's doubts. If he were to transform into a 3rd heaven realm cultivator at this point in time, he would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. It would be the most conservative estimate. Just thinking about it was exhilarating. It was as exhilarating as one could imagine. When a certain someone wanted to be in high spirits, he had even wondered if he could fight Ling Xiaozui and the others with his current ability. However, with his current advancement in cultivation base, he should be able to stun the few old monsters' jaws off no matter what. This was something to be expected. After all, they had only seen him a few days ago. It had only been a few days since then. Have you old geezers ever seen such a drastic change like this before? It would have blinded your eyes. Perhaps he could even flaunt his prowess in front of the 4 young masters. Give Fang Mafei and Lao Mei a scare. Yin Yang had thought through everything that he had just mentioned. There was still a lot more, such as showing off to Yun Xiaoyao, showing off to the Emperor of Yutong, then helping Qiu Jianhan and the other 2 rogues, as well as old Mistress Shangguan to demonstrate his worth. There was really nothing that he had not thought of. However, he had never imagined that he would be severely injured by Ji Lingxi's red beam just as he was about to shine and be admired by others. He would then have to lie back on the bed. This was not going according to the script. What happened to the promise of going out to show off and slap their faces after advancing? Am I still the main character? I didn't even think about molesting you. What the F***ck? Especially since it was Ji Lingxi, that girl, who had forcefully used that thing of hers to tease my palm. In the end, it was also my fault. The last of Yun Yang's consciousness stopped here. He was filled with indignation. Even if he had to defeat Ji Lingxi first, it would have been fine, looking at Yun Yang coming out to spar with confidence and then being sent flying so easily, the 2 ladies were speechless. Ji Lingxi's face was filled with frustration as she screamed hysterically, it still doesn't work. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed, countless feelings welling up in her heart, heartache, realization, understanding, and a hint of delight, Ji Lingxi had not lied to him. This was simply, it had to be said that to Shangguan Lingxiu, this was the best news that she had ever heard. Everything was very clear to him. If it were not for this, if Ji Lingxi did not have such a magical seal on her, she would never have given Yun Yang any hope even if she was beaten to death, according to Ji Lingxi's personality and temper. She would never have given Yun Yang any chance. This was the expected outcome. No woman would be truly generous in such matters. However, the reality was now. No matter how reluctant Ji Lingxi was, no matter how reluctant she was, she had to give Yun Yang a chance, even begging her to join the fray. There were 3 ways to be unfilial, the worst being to have no descendants. Even if Ji Lingxi was a fairy who had descended from the heavens, even if her man loved her so dearly that he did not care about anything else, he could not even hug her for the rest of his life. How could he even talk about carrying on the family line? How could he even talk about harmony? What else could he say? Unless both of them were truly in love with each other, one would be a saintess and the other a eunuch for the rest of their lives. How could there be such logic? Perhaps there were such infatuated people in this world, but it would never be Ji Lingxi and Yun Yang, and it was even more unsuitable for their situation. Especially when the situation was almost unsolvable. Who was Yun Yang now? He had broken through to the Dao realm and ascended to become one of the few legendary experts in the continent. However, he still had no way of fighting back against the red light. How far must he cultivate to be able to resist and break through this red light? Even if it was not hopeless, it was extremely difficult. Do you think that a martial artist's advancement is like eating rice? There are many people who are stuck at the first level and never make any progress for the rest of their lives. This continent is full of them. Of course, you can say that there's hope as long as you're alive. Perhaps you can wait for the day Yun Yang breaks through to be able to fight the red light, or perhaps Yun Yang can wait for you, for the day the red light acknowledges Yun Yang. However, who knows when the day will come? Perhaps it will be 10 years later, 20 years later, or even 60 years later. If it's really a long time later, when both of you are in your 70s or 80s, even if your wish is fulfilled, can you still do it? This is not an impossibility, it's a highly probable situation. Shangguan Lingxiu heaved a long sigh, feeling at ease. She was like a general who had everything under control and was devising strategies. Ji Lingxi, on the other hand, heaved a deep sigh, as if she was not happy that she had the ability to injure a Dao realm cultivator at any time. Chapter 657. Ji Lingxi, on the other hand, was deeply dejected. After all, Yun Yang's advancement this time was not only to prove it to Shangguan Lingxiu, but to Ji Lingxi as well. After all, Yun Yang's advancement this time was very significant. His cultivation base was already on par with hers. If he could suppress the red light, it would be worth it even if she was slightly injured from this strike. As long as the red light was no longer as overbearing, Yun Yang would still have to be given some chances to taste some sweetness, even though he could not do that directly or hug too frequently, as long as the red light was no longer as strong. Now, however, the cruel reality had shattered the last bit of charm that belonged to a young girl in Ji Lingxi's heart. What was left was the urge to point at the sky and curse with clenched teeth. Just what kind of a moral old thing did he set up this kind of restriction on me? Why don't you *king set such a restriction on your own wife? What a bastard. Did I offend you? He couldn't even talk about a relationship anymore. What should I do in the future? She and Yun Yang were in love with each other. Yet, it was like this. Ji Lingxi guessed that if she were to tell Yun Yang that she liked him right now, then, Yun Yang shuddered. Then, he would turn and flee. Was this how one would talk about love? This kind of mental activity would take a long time to describe, but in reality, it only took the blink of an eye to complete. Yun Yang was flung away and collapsed, unconscious. The 2 girls were stunned for a moment before they sprinted over and carried Yun Yang into the room. They placed him on the bed and fed him water and medicine, taking good care of him. Poor Yun Yang had only left this bed for less than 2 hours, but he was already lying on it again, barely breathing. The tragedy was indescribable. When Yun Yang woke up, he saw Shangguan Lingxiu looking at him worriedly while beside her, Ji Lingxi was sneaking glances at him with an apologetic and embarrassed expression. Sigh. The first thing Yun Yang did when he woke up was to let out a long sigh. This sigh simply caused those who heard it to be sad, those who heard it to shed tears, and it was tragic to the point it caused others to doubt their lives. Oh Lingxi. Sister. Lady. Ancestor. Yin Yang covered his forehead with a hand and said weakly, "What are you doing now?" She lowered her head as if she had committed a heinous crime. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzz. "I'm sorry." Yin Yang heaved another long sigh. Sorry, eighth brother, you left me such a good sister." "Well, it doesn't matter if you don't call me brother. If it doesn't work, you can call me hubby. I can accept it if I marry you. In fact, I quite like it, but do you know how many apologies I will receive in this life, whether I marry her or not? Do you know that I need to lie in bed for at least 3 days just because I'm sorry?" You know, the bitterness in Yun Yang's heart was difficult to express, so he could only heave a long sigh. What a tragedy. It seemed that in all the creation of Xian Qi in the world, there had never been such a thing. If this matter were to be spread out, he did not know how he would be ridiculed. One day in the future, Supreme Cloud had become a legend. Thus, stories of a certain person and strange things about him swept the martial world. Hey, do you know about Supreme Cloud? Supreme Cloud of the 9 Supremes? Nonsense, who doesn't know about him? He's called the 9 Supremes think tank. Then you must know that Supreme Cloud is married? Of course, isn't he marrying Supreme Wind's biological sister? What secret is this? Look at how secretive you are. But do you know that Supreme Cloud has lain down again? Lain down? And, again? What happened? You don't know, do you? Come, sit down. Let me tell you in detail, do you know? A kiss? Lie down for 3 days. Do you know? A hug? Lie down for 3 days. Do you know? Lie down on the same bed, for 3 days. What? Zhou Gong? The thing between husband and wife, that doesn't exist. Some years later, Supreme Cloud passed away. Thus, do you know? Our Lord Supreme Cloud was still a virgin when he passed away. Hiss. How is this possible? Isn't Lord Supreme Cloud's wife? I know you don't know. Lord Supreme Cloud is really the kind of person who died a hard death according to legend. Come, sit down. Let me tell you in detail. Thinking about it, Yun Yang felt as if the sky had darkened and his heart had died. He wanted to cry but no tears came out. I've already created a legend. Don't tell me. I have to create another legend? I'm suffering. Yun Yang was suffering, Ji Lingxi was suffering too. It could even be said that Ji Lingxi was suffering more than Yun Yang, 100 times worse. Tears were already welling up in her eyes now. Why is my life so bitter? It's fine that you gave birth to me but didn't raise me. Why are you doing this? Lingxi, don't be sad. You still have me, don't you? I'll do my best to help you. Shangguan Lingxiu hugged Ji Lingxi's shoulders and said softly, I think that the seal will disappear one day. Maybe when your cultivation base breaks through again, or when you find the person who set it up. Don't give up hope, Ji Lingxi sobbed. What if we can't find him? As long as you don't give up, you'll definitely find him. Shangguan Lingxiu said confidently. Ji Lingxi choked on her sobs. Yun Yang was initially unromantic. The window between her and Yun Yang had not been opened, so it was fine. Now, however, both of them had understood each other's feelings and were even vaguely willing to accept each other. It was already within their expectations to see Yun Yang succeed. Yet, a problem had arisen at what should have been the sweetest moment. It was a deadlock that could not be resolved or reconciled. To Ji Lingxi, it was the cruelest of all. The man she loved with her life, the man she loved with everything she had, yet he did not even have the right to be close to her. Was there anything more ridiculous and indescribable than this in this world? Yun Yang knew that Ji Lingxi was upset as well, so he comforted her gently, "Don't worry, don't worry. The seal on you is strong, but it's set up with a strong cultivation base. With our current cultivation base advancement, we might be able to undo it in a few years. We can still." Yun Yang stopped talking abruptly. That's right, how could he continue? What else could he do then? Yun Yang's mouth was agape, stunned and speechless. In fact, he was not the only one. Shangguan Lingxiu and Ji Lingxi blushed as well. Pervert. Ji Lingxi's face was still wet with tears, but they had turned crimson from shyness. She was alluring and captivating, causing one's imagination to run wild. Shut up. What nonsense are you spouting? However, he sighed in his heart. Yun Yang was right, but judging from the strength of the seal, it might not be possible even if she were to break through another dozen levels. Besides, how long would it take to achieve those dozen levels? If she could maintain the progress of breaking through just by dreaming and sleeping, perhaps it would not take more than a few days. However, the seal was imposed on her, it would be difficult to undo it herself. Another way to solve it was to count on Yun Yang. However, Yun Yang did not have what she had. A dozen levels would take 10 years, 20 years, 30 to 50 years, or even half a lifetime. The higher her cultivation base, the more difficult it would be for Yun Yang to undo the seal. The young lady's heart was torn. As she thought about it, she almost cried again. Chapter 658. Although Shangguan Lingxiu was reluctant to leave, she still chose to stand up and bid her farewell. The problem now was neither Yun Yang nor herself. The crux of the matter was Ji Lingxi. Encountering such an incident, if she were to act recklessly, it would be unavoidable that she would regret it for the rest of her life. Before she left, she winked at Yun Yang, indicating for him to comfort him. Only then did she leave with a heavy heart, no longer feeling the joy she had before. Yun Yang sent Feng Mafei and the others to escort Shangguan Lingxiu away. Shangguan Lingxiu's brows were already locked in a frown as she walked, recalling the day's events. There was still a tinge of happiness in Shangguan Lingxiu's heart because Yun Yang did have feelings for her and Ji Lingxi had made a great concession, making things very clear. It could be said that as long as she let go of the burden on her shoulders, she could achieve good things at any time. In spite of this, feeling happy and blissful was one thing. Once she thought of Ji Lingxi's situation, she could not help sighing and frowning. What should she do? How could such an inconceivable thing exist in this world? Was it not a little too bizarre? Shangguan Lingxiu had been thinking along the way back, wondering how she should resolve the matter appropriately. Shangguan Lingxiu could actually foresee that if this matter was not resolved, even if she eventually married Yun Yang and fulfilled her wish, it would be difficult for everyone to be truly happy in the days to come, not just for Ji Lingxi, but also for herself and Yun Yang. As long as this matter was not resolved, it would be difficult for everyone to be truly happy. It must be resolved. Shangguan Lingxiu thought, lost in thought, even if it's resolved now and Ji Lingxi rejects me again, this matter must still be the first priority. Yun Yang laid in an absolutely miserable position for a day and a half before he finally recovered. During this period of time, Yun Yang's state of mind could only be described with one word: burning with impatience. He had been delayed for 2 whole days and 1 whole night. The assassins had failed to assassinate him mainly because they were not prepared, but after the leader of the masked men returned and Sir Bai reflected on his failure, how could he not be prepared? Initially, his breakthrough in his cultivation base and the unexpected recovery of his injuries had been a pleasant surprise, giving him an additional bargaining chip. However, what Ji Lingxi had done had nullified the pleasant surprise that he had gained from the unexpected advantage he had gained. After all, it had been a long time since he was besieged. According to Yun Yang's assessment of Sir Bai, there must be a corresponding response. Whether he had escaped, gone into hiding, or had other countermeasures, it would only complicate the situation that was already clear. However, who could he blame for this? Ji Lingxi and the red glow on her body? It seemed like he could be blamed, but if he had not wanted to show off because his cultivation base had improved, would he have been retaliated against if he had not wanted to show off in front of the masses and show off? Forget it, this is fate. I have no choice but to face it, and face it positively. Just as Yun Yang got up and walked out, he saw Ji Lingxi heaving a soft sigh of relief on the other side. He muttered to himself, a day and a half too early. What do you mean by a day and a half early? Yun Yang asked in surprise. It's nothing, it's nothing. You heard wrong. Ji Lingxi's gaze was evasive. She only glanced at him once before she scampered away like a frightened rabbit. Yun Yang could vaguely see that the girl's eyes were red and swollen. Her face was flushed, almost to the point of her neck. Yun Yang watched Ji Lingxi's fleeing silhouette in a daze. After a long time, he sighed. One day, Yun Yang said quietly. When he spoke up to hear, he didn't continue speaking. He casually waved his hand, and a purple robe suddenly appeared on his body. When he walked out of the room, his aura turned icy cold and ghastly. It was as if a devil god had descended into the world. It was bone-piercingly cold, and it caused others to tremble with fear. Those assassins are not dead yet, are they? Not yet, they're alive and well. To the secret chamber. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei shuddered in unison upon hearing the words to the secret chamber. How could they not know that the assassins' good days had come? Yin Yang's interrogation method could only be described with one word, unparalleled in this world. This young man who looked clean and refreshed from head to toe, his face was gentle and refined, exuding an air of elegance and nobility. However, as he walked into the place where the assassins were imprisoned, the place became scarier than the underworld to the assassins. The door to the secret chamber that was as thick as a city wall slowly closed. Shangguan Lingxiu rushed over, only to see Ji Lingxi staring at Yun Yang's silhouette disappearing into the secret chamber. Somehow, the only thing Shangguan Lingxiu felt was that Yun Yang's silhouette was filled with an extremely oppressive aura that was extremely intimidating. Once Yun Yang entered, it took him 8 whole hours to do so. When he came out again, it was already evening, when the sun was about to set. Looking over, Yun Yang looked as usual, his purple robe still clean. He walked out calmly, like a young master who had just returned from an outing, looking indescribably carefree. As for Fang Mafei and Lao Mei who were following behind Yun Yang, their appearances and auras were similar. They were both pale, their usually tall and sturdy bodies trembling slightly, their hair drenched in sweat and the corners of their eyes and brows filled with unconcealable fear. Throughout the day of interrogation, Fang Mafei and Lao Mei had only assisted from the side. In fact, most of the time, it was only Yun Yang who was in charge of the interrogation while the two of them were outside. Even Lao Mei, who had participated the most, had only accompanied Yun Yang in interrogating one of the assassins. This time, however, Lao Mei and Fang Mafei felt that they had finally witnessed what was meant by interrogation by torture. Honestly, Yin Yang's interrogation method was not fancy nor was it complicated. There was no stunning, unique technique. Throughout the entire process, everything seemed very ordinary. The only unusual thing about him was the continuous progress. Also, his face seemed to have an eternally calm and indifferent expression. It was fine if he did not speak. Continue. Torment him to death, then rescue him. Then ask him if he did not speak. Not speak? All right, continue. Then the next one. Not speak? It's all right, I'll just watch. This elder brother has patience. I'll let all of you cheer each other up, let all of you hurl insults, let all of you curse, let all of you torture and interrogate again and again, over and over again. I didn't even interrogate them separately, gathering all the assassin captives together right from the start. Together, I'm not afraid of your collusion, you're welcome to try. As long as you have the confidence to hide it from me. A single person might be able to withstand a test of death, because in most cases, a single death would be the end of 100. However, to fall into Yun Yang's hands, especially when Emmy had returned, death would be the end of everything. It was a joke. You want to die? No problem, I'll let you go through the endless cycle from life to death, no problem at all. Chapter 659. Each and every one of them was an experienced martial world expert, a top-notch assassin who viewed death as a return home. It was true that they did not regard life and death as a trivial matter. However, under Yun Yang's hands, they had slowly gone from gritting their teeth to cursing loudly, to cursing viciously, to moaning in agony, to spasms and spasms, to being unable to utter a single word. Then, the cycle repeated until they begged for mercy and begged for mercy. He crawled on the ground like a dog, automatically shaking out all 8 generations of his ancestors. There was even a fellow who had accidentally said a word of his ancestor's name wrongly when he was confessing and had to go through the process of life and death once more. Even Fang Mafei and Lao Mei felt that under such circumstances, if the information obtained could still be false, then the entire world could only be an illusion. The Four Seasons Tower's influence in the Empire of Yutong has finally reached its head and gotten a clue. Yin Yang was deep in thought, a cold glint glinting in his eyes. After such a long time, the battle of wits and courage for more than 2 years, and the recent rebellion of the Snow, Frost, and Sword, the attacks from all sides, from the imperial court to the martial world, and the alliance of experts like Ling Xiaozue, Heaven's Inquisition, and Du Guchou. The assassin organizations in the martial world had been muddled, suffering heavy casualties. The entire martial world had become a piece of porridge, and 5 out of the 5 empires had almost been destroyed. It was at this moment that the Four Seasons Tower's base in the Empire of Yutong was truly touched. The most crucial figures of the Four Seasons Tower at the current stage were 2 people, Sir Bai and Wu Ying. As long as these 2 people and the forces under them were uprooted, the Empire of Yutong could be considered to be completely at peace. Yin Yang had a fairly good grasp of Sir Bai's arrangements and some of Wu Ying's materials. However, Wu Ying's cautiousness was still beyond Yun Yang's expectations. The assassins he had captured this time only knew that there was such a person on Wu Ying's side. They did not even know his name, identity, or any other details about him. How can I focus on other things and eradicate him in one fell swoop? Yin Yang contemplated seriously, planning his troops and setting up his formation, but he realized that it was too difficult, or perhaps, beyond his capabilities. Since it's beyond my capabilities, don't insist on fighting both sides. Focus your energy on one side first, then think about the rest after defeating either side. As for the other side, just keep a close eye on him. I don't believe that he can escape from this inescapable net. Yin Yang quickly made up his mind. Hesitation was the biggest taboo in such matters. Since he couldn't take care of both sides, he would take care of one side first. If he continued to hesitate, it would be hard to avoid alerting the enemy, and both sides would fail. However, on the day when he was about to act against the core of the Four Seasons Tower in the Empire of Yutong, Yin Yang suddenly had a feeling. Easy. Yin Yang was puzzled by this peculiar feeling. During this process, he'd clearly experienced untold hardships and countless narrow escapes. It could be said to be hair-raising. But why did he think that it was easy at the last moment? Isn't this too inconceivable? If it had been slightly more difficult, I'm afraid that my soul would have long dispersed. Tonight, after midnight, we will begin the operation. Late at night. In Sir Bai's residence. In the study. A chessboard was filled with black and white pieces. Both sides were engaged in a fierce battle. Sir Bai stared at the chessboard, a black piece in his hand. His brows were locked in a frown as he pondered, unable to make a move. I can't go anywhere. There's no way out in all directions. I can't do anything even if I force myself to. There's no way to fight back. What should we do? His lean face was filled with contemplation and worry. At this moment, the silhouette of a person suddenly swayed, and there were suddenly 3 more people beside him. 3 people who looked exactly the same. To be more precise, there were 4 people who looked exactly the same. The 3 people who had appeared out of nowhere were exactly the same as Sir Bai. Just by looking at their faces and bodies, they were almost exactly the same. There was no difference at all. Even their spirits and temperament were exactly the same. There was no difference at all. Sir Bai did not seem to notice the 3 people who had appeared out of nowhere. He was still focused on the chessboard, deep in thought without any distractions in his mind. From time to time, he would collect the chess pieces one by one and place them down again. He repeated this process over and over again. Time passed bit by bit. Ever since the 3 people arrived, they had been standing behind him, motionless and silent. They didn't even make a sound. However, the anxiety on their faces was becoming more and more indescribable, and more intense. After a long, long time, it was almost midnight. Finally, one of them could not help but speak up. "Boss, you should make a decision." Sir Bai stared at the chessboard on the table and said faintly, "What decision?" It's taboo to act recklessly in such a situation where there's no chance of survival. If you don't have a sufficient countermeasure, coming up with a decision will only be courting death by hastening your own defeat. Sigh. The 3 people behind him stomped their feet anxiously. "I'm not talking about that. It's the same." Sir Bai continued to stare at the chessboard, his voice calm and leisurely. The chessboard and reality are the same. How can there be victory when one is confused and acts recklessly? He lifted his head slowly to look at the white piece in his palm and said faintly, "Life is like a chessboard and the chessboard is like life. I am this white chess piece. Right now, I'm at this delicate juncture. I can't advance, I can't retreat, I can't go left, I can't go right. A step forward is a mountain of blades and a sea of fire, a step back is a bottomless abyss. Staying where I am and watching the changes quietly, dealing with the changes with inaction might be the best choice. It's a pity that the game has already begun and it's hard to stop. It's all because I'm already in the game." Sir Bai sighed softly as he looked at the white chess piece affectionately with 2 fingers. "Big brother, you're being too pessimistic. This young brother thinks that while the current situation is dire, we still have room to maneuver, whether we attack or defend. Even if it doesn't work and we can't do anything, who in this world can stop us from being carefree when the few of us leave Tiantang City? Even if Yutang's military forces surround us, it won't be difficult for the 4 of us to fight our way out and break out of the siege with our abilities. Being in the game is only a limitation. Tiantang City is the limitation. As long as we leave Tiantang City, we'll be out of the game. Once we're not in the game, it doesn't matter whether it's the beginning or the end." Another person said, "But, big brother, please make a decision soon." Chapter 660. The Go Playbook. The 3 men behind him were speechless. "Boss, we don't want to discuss this Go Playbook with you at all. What we want to discuss now is our life, death, and future. Why can't you tell what's more important? You're still studying the Go Playbook at such a critical moment." Sir Bai said faintly, "This Go Playbook. I've actually seen it before." The 3 men behind him were shocked, their expressions changing further. Then? Sir Bai sighed softly. Suddenly, a gurgling sound came from his throat as a mouthful of blood gushed up. He suppressed it with all his might, but a trickle of blood still seeped out from the corner of his mouth. At the same time, the 3 men behind him grunted as well, blood seeping from the corners of their mouths. "Do you understand now?" Sir Bai asked softly, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth gracefully. The 3 men were pale as a sheet, their eyes gleaming with fear. What's going on?" Sir Bai sucked in a deep breath, his gaze dim. "I've implicated all of you this time." The 3 of them said at the same time, "We are brothers. Going through life and death with Big Brother is what we ought to do. From the beginning to the end, we are willing to endure hardship as if it were malt syrup. However, we really don't understand this situation. What is going on? How do we explain it? Why are we suddenly so traumatized? Sir Bai looked out the window, his gaze distant as he said, "Back then, when Heaven's Inquisition was still in the human realm, I spent a fortune to have my fortune told by Heaven's Inquisition. Do you still remember this?" The three men replied, "Of course we do. It was because of that calculation that our fortune was almost emptied. It was such a huge sum that we couldn't forget it even if we wanted to." Sir Bai said faintly, "You know about that calculation, but you didn't know that I was already the Four Seasons Tower's civil official then. I was determined to rule the world, to bring peace to the world, to assist the king, to unify Tianxian, and to achieve the unprecedented feat of an emperor. However, I joined the Four Seasons Tower by chance. Back then, I was lost about my future, not knowing what to choose. It was precisely because I was lost about my future that I decided to have my fortune read and leave my future in the hands of fate. Heaven's Inquisition is undoubtedly the best choice. It's also the only choice I can trust. The heavenly Tao is arbitrary, and it's the will of the heavens. I believe that you are still thinking about the result of my divination today. However, I haven't told you about it. It's not that I don't want to tell you, it's because I didn't really understand the prophecy of the heavenly divination. However, when this chess manual appeared in front of me, I suddenly understood. I understand everything now. So, this is my fate, a fate determined by the heavens, and it cannot be avoided." Sir Bai spoke slowly. The other three became more and more perplexed as they listened. They said, "Big brother, what you're saying is so confusing that we're even more confused. Can you just tell us what's going on?" Sir Bai chuckled and said, "Heaven's Inquisition spoke to me then. I've kept these words in my heart and never told anyone, so not even you know about them. However, it's these words that have kept me bottled up all my life." His gaze was distant as he said, "Pure gold and unpolished jade in the world of mortals, a dragon among men who have made contributions. It's a pity that I can't be the one chosen by the heavens, a dash of red that shakes the martial world. This life is like a dream, no one can say for sure. It's hard to win or lose when one enters the game of Go. One is a pawn, manipulated by others. Meeting the remnant of the manual is the end." Sir Bai sucked in a soft breath and said, "For so many years, whether I'm busy or not, as long as I'm free, I'll study these few lines. Yet, I still don't understand them." The three of them widened their eyes and pondered over these words. However, they were completely confused and stunned on the spot. "Forget it. Let me explain it to you, so that you don't have to waste your time. The first two lines are pure gold and unpolished jade in the world of mortals, a dragon among men who have made contributions." Sir Bai said, "It's basically saying that I'm a talent. If I can make contributions, I can become a dragon among men." The meaning of a dragon among men, in a general sense, refers to an official who holds the highest position and wields power in the imperial court. It's a pity that I can't be the one chosen by the heavens, a dash of red that shakes the martial world. These two lines are saying, no matter what my initial intentions were, no matter what I wanted to do, I couldn't walk the path that I wanted to walk the most. I didn't enter the imperial court, but I became a formidable figure in the martial world instead. Then there's this life is like a dream, no one can say for sure. It's hard to win or lose when one enters the game of Go." Sigh. He heaved a long sigh. "I understand these two lines as well. It's, how can one's merits and demerits be determined? No matter what, I'm already trapped in the game of Go, it's hard to escape. Even in my dreams, I want to become a simple chess player, but, in reality, I'm just a chess piece." Sir Bai sighed deeply and said, "As for being a pawn, manipulated by others, meeting the remnant of the manual is the end." Of these two sentences, I originally only understood the first one. Since I've become a pawn, I naturally have to be manipulated, or rather, manipulated. At most, I'll perform better in the process of being a pawn, adding a few more colors to my life. That's all. As for the last line, I've never thought of its true meaning. It was only when I saw this Go manual that I was enlightened. So, this is the so-called remnant of the manual. This is the end of my fate. Sir Bai sighed softly and said, as for the Go manual I mentioned just now, this is the second time I've seen it. That day, Fang Yun snatched this Go manual from Yun Yang. He mused, as if he wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. After a long, long time, he said in a daze, I remember the first time I saw this Go manual. Before he could finish his sentence, he fell silent again. The other three men felt their blood churning like they were about to spit another mouthful of blood, but they held it in. Sir Bai said. Back then, my career was hopeless and I was oppressed by others. In my boredom, I focused on studying Go. I had nothing else to ask for in this life. Living in seclusion in the woods, it wasn't a bad choice. During that time, I traveled the world under the alias of Qi Yisheng, challenging Go experts everywhere. In the end, I won the title of One-Hand Go Saint. Do any of you have any impression of this saying, 1,000 tribulations, a single hand wins? Sir Bai's smile was bitter, his gaze filled with reminiscence as if he had returned to that period of time. Speaking of which, that period of time was the happiest and most carefree of my life. I still reminisce about it every night. It would be delightful if this life could last forever. About a few years later, I unexpectedly received a message from the Four Seasons Tower's Heavenly Palace, High Cloud Pavilion. It said that a reclusive cultivator wanted to play a game of Go with me. Sir Bai said in a low voice, back then, I didn't think much of the Four Seasons Tower's reclusive cultivator, but I've heard of the Four Seasons Tower's name after all. I dared not be negligent then, so I rushed over. It's funny now that I think about it. Back then, I boasted that I was peerless in the world of Go, so I didn't think much of the other party. I even thought of preserving some of my ability to save the other party some face. After all, the other party was a reclusive cultivator. It didn't matter if I could win or not. Wouldn't it be fine as long as I knew who won or lost? When I got there, the other party let me rest for 3 days to recharge my energy. On the 4th day, we played a game of Go behind a curtain. At the beginning of the game, the person asked me, how many games do you want to decide the winner? Please note, according to the relevant laws and regulations of the country, please do not upload any pornographic, vulgar, political content or other illegal content. We will handle it according to the regulations and report it. Happy face. Chapter 661. Sir Bai closed his eyes and said leisurely, at that time, I thought I'd win for sure, but I dared not be presumptuous. How about 4 wins out of 7? The person opposite me smiled and said, you're the chess saint of this generation. You've been unparalleled in Tianxian for the past few years and have your own unique skills. However, I've been playing this game for more than 1,000 years. The outcome of the game is still up in the air. Let's go with 5 wins out of 9. Since there's nothing else to do, we can kill some time. I nodded in agreement and even planned to win 4 out of 9 games and let my opponent win 1 more to save face. However, what I didn't expect was that not only did each of the 9 games take longer than usual, but each of the 9 games took longer than the last. The first game took a day and a night, and I finally won by half a point. Through this game, I knew that my opponent was no weaker than me. In fact, he was a chess expert who was even stronger than me. Therefore, I was much more cautious after that. As for the opponent, he must have underestimated me in the first game and lost, so he became more cautious in the second game. In fact, in general, we didn't bring out our best in the first game. I guess we held back a lot. The second game went on for 7 days. In the end, I lost to my opponent by a single point. But even though I lost this game, I didn't feel depressed. Instead, I felt satisfied. This was a confrontation between high-level Go players. Although it took a long time and I was inevitably exhausted, I was only physically tired and not mentally tired. Although I lost, my fighting spirit didn't diminish at all. I even felt that my Go skills had improved. After the second game, I rested for 3 days before starting the third game. When it came to the ninth game, which was the deciding game, both of us gave it our all. Basically, every move we made was an exhausting effort. Each move required the opponent to think for at least a few days. By the end of the ninth game, a year had passed since the start of the first game. A year. The other 3 people were speechless. He had only played 9 rounds of chess for an entire year. He had never heard of such a thing before. It was completely unheard of. After the ninth game, the person on the other side was very happy. He said that my chess skills were indeed worthy of my reputation, outstanding and extraordinary. Then, he asked me to take a look at the game and handed me a booklet. Sir Bai patted the Go record in his hand and chuckled with an indescribable feeling. I believe all of you must have connected the dots. Yes, this is it. I remember very clearly that one of the pages of the book was missing a corner, and under that corner, in the same position as the first game, was a tribulation material. As he said this, he flipped to the title page and looked at the upper right corner of the diagram. Sure enough, it was a series of tribulations. Both sides wanted to raise their pieces, and both sides were only one step away from killing the other and achieving a complete victory. And the position of this missing corner just so happened to be a black chess piece, which was placed there securely. This calamity material will determine the outcome of this game. It is also the only important calamity material in the entire game. Sir Bai said, when he handed me this Go record, he said, I've had this Go record for many years, but I've never been able to decipher it. I don't even know how to play the first game. Your Go skill is superb and you're already a top-notch player. You're qualified to play this game. Come, let's study it and see if we can make a breakthrough. That was my experience when I first saw this incomplete record. Sir Bai sucked in a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Unable to contain the agitation in his heart, he inhaled again and exhaled slowly. The other 3 people were already stunned. But this Go record. Doesn't this mean that there's a secret behind it? One of them said hesitantly. That's right, there's a secret behind it. Perhaps, it's a lucky strike in another sense. Sir Bai said, that day, Yun Yang came to the Crown Prince's residence and said that he was here to look for me to solve the famous Go game. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. After all, it's been too long since a famous Go game caught my attention. However, when he laid out the game here, I recognized it immediately. This was the final game that I'd encountered back then. Looking at his subsequent 7 moves, I was even more certain that this wasn't just the game back then, it was the game that I'd disassembled with the reclusive expert. Back then, we'd disassembled it for 3 months, but we still couldn't solve it. Back then, I couldn't disassemble the final game and left in regret. Instead, I disassembled my life into the 4 Seasons Tower. I didn't expect that I still couldn't solve it today. If it were only the final game, I wouldn't have been so rash. However, I saw the original Go record book again in the Crown Prince's residence. Sir Bai said, this reality prompted me to make a plan right away, to kill Yun Yang on that very day. What I didn't expect was that not only did my flawless ambush fail to kill Yun Yang, but I also lost all 16 of my guards. Fang Yun was the only one who managed to escape. What surprised me the most about this outcome was that Yun Yang didn't kill all 16 of them. Forget it, the world is unpredictable, there are always accidents. However, the second target, this Go record, was snatched back. This can't be explained as an accident. Even then, I knew that the end of my life had come. Sir Bai sighed softly. From the beginning to the end, he did not mention who won and who lost the 9 Go games. The person behind him said with a frown, Boss, if you really wanted to kill Yun Yang, why didn't you do it yourself? Let's take a step back and let the 3 of us do it. Even if Yun Yang was exceptionally capable, how could he have escaped from the 3 of us? Sir Bai chuckled humorlessly. Man proposes, but God disposes. It's because God's will is unpredictable. If it's unpredictable, it'll exceed our expectations and we'll lose the entire game. This is probably what they mean by fate. My success and failure in this life of mine are based on propriety. As for my failure, it's because I'm too propriety. When I saw the Go record being snatched back, I knew that I was wrong. The people I sent were wrong. However, it was already too late to change. Back then, I thought that I'd seen it clearly. Yin Yang was a young talent, the cream of the crop. His cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of the ninth heaven realm. It could be said that he was the cream of the crop, the cream of the crop. However, sending Fang Yun alone was already too much. It was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. Furthermore, with the help of 15 people. With such a lineup, even if there were 10 Yin Yangs, they should have been able to kill him in one go. There wouldn't be any accidents. Yet, I didn't manage to kill him. How could it not be God's will? Heaven's will, heaven's will. Could it be that God did it on purpose? This was the biggest mistake of my life. This mistake caused the entire game to be lost. Indeed, a single wrong word caused the entire game to be lost. Chapter 662. The three of them sighed at the same time. There was nothing wrong with this. It could only mean that the heavens were toying with them, or perhaps it was intentional. The auras of the pinnacle experts in Tiantang City had all disappeared at this juncture. More precisely, the ones with the highest cultivation base in the entire Tiantang City were Sir Bai's men. I've sent out 10 cats just to deal with a small mouse. Is it enough? Just by thinking about it, it's enough. It's more than enough. Do I have to send out 4 tigers just to deal with a small mouse? But that was exactly where the problem lay. Who would have thought that 10 cats would actually fail to take down that little mouse? Who could he reason with about this matter? Who could tell that the mouse was actually a cat-eating mouse? It was poisonous. Do you still remember how all 4 of us spat blood at the same time when I received this Go playbook? Asked Sir Bai. Yes, how could we not? Sir Bai chuckled bitterly. We cultivate the 4-directional deity brutality divine art. The advantage of this cultivation method lies in the fact that we share the same fate. Our cultivation progress is 4 to 16 times that of an ordinary person. It's a rare skill, but this is also its flaw. Once one of us is damaged, all of us will be damaged. This is because all 4 of our lifelines have merged into one. Once any one of us dies, the rest of us will die as well. There are no exceptions. Many people know about the existence of US brothers. It's no secret that I have a substitute, but no one knows that the death of one of us is equivalent to the death of all 4 of us. There's no need to be too pessimistic. After all, when we're together, we can unleash 16 times the power of each of us individually. Another man said, with the combined combat power of the 4 of us, we can even fight Ling Xiaozui head-on. That was in the past. It's destined not to work now. Sir Bai chuckled humorlessly, his expression grim. This Go manual has triggered the seal within me. We can't unleash much of our power anymore. That's why I said, it's me, that I've dragged you 3 brothers into this. He looked at his 3 brothers apologetically. I'm sorry. All 3 of them felt their blood boil. Big brother, what are you saying? We brothers have roamed unhindered our entire lives, enjoying ourselves in the Jianghu. We have long been able to break even, and we have quite a bit of wealth. Walking the same path in life and death was the true meaning of brotherhood. What are you apologizing for? Isn't that too distant? Sir Bai nodded in relief and then frowned. However, I still have a question that I don't understand. He did not go on, but thought to himself that there was something strange about the whole thing, and it was hard to explain it. Because the original owner of this chess manual was that person. Why was it in Yin Yang's hands now? It was understandable that Yun Yang had the Go manual and used it as a medium to find him. After all, this was his hobby and many people knew about it. His skill and go was considered famous even in a small circle in Tiantang City. Therefore, how this go manual had fallen into Yun Yang's hands was an unsolvable mystery. To Sir Bai's knowledge, the owner of this go manual should not be friends with Yun Yang, no matter what. They should not even be acquainted with each other. The difference in power level was too great. In fact, it should be said that they were enemies. What was the reason for this go manual to fall into Yun Yang's hands? If that person had the intention to kill him, why would he need to go through so much trouble? With a single thought, Sir Bai would be annihilated. However, what was the purpose of doing so? No matter what, Sir Bai was certain of one thing: from the moment the go manual fell into his hands and triggered the seal, he would not be able to live. The one who wanted him dead was not the enemy, but that person. As long as that person wanted him dead, it would be useless even if he had escaped from Tiantang City and thousands of miles away. But why did that person want him dead? Moreover, by the looks of it, he was bound to die in Yun Yang's hands. However, this was incomprehensible. You've built the Four Seasons Tower painstakingly, but you've watched the tower's peripheral forces being devoured bit by bit. You've watched the Four Seasons Tower's talents die one by one. Why? The Four Seasons Tower has been the talk of the town for so many years, dominating the martial world. Why must you destroy your own foundation today? What is the end of all this? As Sir Bai pondered, he felt the blood in his body rush inexplicably. For a moment, he felt dizzy, his vision blurred. He could not help but spit out another mouthful of blood. The three men behind him spat blood at the same time as well. Each of them swayed, their expressions drained of energy. I've always been a chess piece, manipulated by someone else. I can't believe that even my death will be manipulated by someone else. If there's a next life, Sir Bai said with a smile, I must be the Go player. I won't resign myself to being a chess piece. He chuckled sadly and said, brothers, it looks like it's time. Let's be on our way. Blood trickled down the corners of the trio's mouths as they looked up at him with complicated gazes. Do we still have to wait for someone to kill us and help them complete a merit? Sir Bai smiled faintly. If he wants me to live like this, of course, I can live like this. However, if he wants me to die like this, I'm not resigned to it. I can't decide my own path of life. I still want to decide this path of death one last time. The trio shuddered. Where's Fang Yun? Fang Yun, Sir Bai closed his eyes. He's already taken some of my belongings, far away in the martial world. Chapter 663. The large residence had long been engulfed by the raging fire. The tongue of flame that soared high up in the night sky was eye-catching. The billowing heatwave was torturous even though it was 1,000 feet away. Yin Yang and the others stopped in their tracks when they saw the scene, their eyes filled with disbelief. The place that caught fire is Sir Bai's residence. Yin Yang's gaze froze. What happened? Why did it catch fire all of a sudden and with such intensity? First Court King Qingguang replied, caught fire? How can such a fire be a coincidence? It must have been premeditated. I reckon that it must have been prepared for a long time in advance, that's why it can be so ferocious once it erupts. With this fire as a barrier, our goal this time is destined to fail. Even the tiniest trace will be annihilated in the sea of fire. Yin Yang snorted. His long form soared into the sky and disappeared in a flash in the air. Swoosh, it was as if the Milky Way was flowing backwards. Countless streams of water poured down from the sky and splashed onto the raging sea of fire. At the same time, 3 wells in Sir Bai's residence spewed out huge water pillars as well. With the convergence of heaven and earth, even such a fire did not last more than a dozen breaths before the sea of fire was completely extinguished. There was no spark left, only green smoke that rose in spirals. In spite of this, the convergence of heaven and earth continued to wash back and forth, causing the remaining heatwave to recede swiftly. Yin Yang entered the residence of Bai swiftly in a flash. No matter how fast Yun Yang's convergence of heaven and earth extinguished the fire, he could not save the residence of Bai that was engulfed by the sea of fire. The entire residence was filled with broken walls and debris, like a ghost town. Even the sturdiest beam had been charred. Yin Yang made a quick round and released his deific consciousness. What he saw was the entire residence of Bai's servants and guards, all of them charred black, lying dead in their rooms and courtyards. Not a single one escaped. Sir Bai is ruthless. However, the discovery in the study surprised Yun Yang. Initially, Yun Yang had thought that the fire must be Sir Bai's plan to escape, to attract everyone's attention with the raging fire while he took the opportunity to escape. He could also use the fire to completely erase all information about him, such as the servants and guards who had been burned to death outside. As long as Sir Bai could escape, there was no need to consider anything else. When Yun Yang saw the 4 corpses on the ground, however, he was surprised. The faces of these 4 corpses were lifelike, only their hair was slightly curled from the heat wave. He had no idea what method Sir Bai had used. Based on the direction of the fire, the study was obviously the first to catch fire, but this was the part that was preserved the most intact. This is too strange. None of this can be explained. One of the 4 must be Sir Bai. Yin Yang studied them carefully. All 4 of them have the same face. Furthermore, he didn't use any disguise techniques. If he said that he had prepared it beforehand, it would be difficult for him to do such a thing. It would be even more superfluous and unreasonable. Everyone who had rushed over was speechless when they saw the scene. Had Sir Bai, who was rumored to be extremely intelligent and omnipotent, who had 3 substitutes, died without a trace just like that? He had died together with his 3 substitutes, without even a struggle to escape. The faces of the 4 of them were abnormally calm, as if this sudden death was nothing more than an ordinary matter to them, just like how they slept on time every night. Sir Bai, the important target of this trip, who had made everyone feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy and had prepared themselves to sacrifice themselves, had died without a trace, just like that. The indescribable disparity made everyone there feel like they had been through a roller coaster of emotions, as well as the sudden rise and fall of joy and sorrow. Sir Bai remained seated in front of the study table until the moment of his death. There was even a white Go piece in his right hand. The Go board in front of him was already covered in dust. Yin Yang blew away the dust with a soft breath, revealing the incomplete game he had played with Sir Bai the other day. On the table by the side of the Go board was a Go manual. Yin Yang recognized it. It was the Go manual that he had taken from Feng Xianga and had been snatched away by Sir Bai's men. The study room was the starting point of the fire, so it should have been the place where the fire was the most intense. If only the 4 corpses had been preserved, it could still be explained by the fact that the 4 men's cultivation base was profound. Although the basic qi left in the bodies could still protect the corpses, the Go board and Go pieces were not destroyed by the fire. What was more, the Go manual had survived as well. Yin Yang would never believe that there was no mystery behind it. He picked up the Go manual gently and found that there were other words written on the table under the manual. Someone had carved the words directly on the table with his finger. There were only 7 words in total, but there was an indescribable and strange atmosphere between the lines. It was full of pride. The 7 words were, Supreme Cloud, you didn't expect this, did you? Yin Yang's pupils contracted at once. Supreme Cloud, you didn't expect this, did you? What did I not expect? Supreme Cloud? Are you sure of my identity? If so, why didn't you say so? This was a huge secret, one that could be exchanged for a great price. Also, who forced you to kill yourself? More precisely, why did you kill yourself? After examining the corpses, Fang Mafei said, the cause of death of these people is suicide. They died by severing their meridians. There's no doubt about this, but before they severed their meridians, their vitality was drained by an unknown method. Their internal organs showed signs of exhaustion. It's like they were under some strange method that caused their vitality to drain away. But the blood in their bodies doesn't show any signs of deterioration. You must know that blood is the source of life. In a situation where there is no vitality, the blood should be the first to deteriorate. But they don't show any signs of this, only then did they die by severing their meridians. In other words, they should have perished together after the fire started. Why is this so? There are so many mysteries and it's hard to unravel. Yun Yang slammed his palm on the table and said faintly, "There's no need to worry about it. They're dead now. This is the end." The table turned into dust with a loud pop. The words that revealed Yun Yang's identity as Supreme Cloud were gone, unseen by anyone other than Yun Yang. "Search the house," Yun Yang said calmly. "Bring everything of value back and pay attention to the secret chambers." Since the target was probably unwilling to die, there might really be some clues left behind. The group obeyed and began to move separately. As expected, they found the secret chambers. Moreover, they found a total of 4 secret chambers. Surprisingly, they were empty. There was nothing inside, which was very different from what Yun Yang had expected. Such a large fire had already alerted the Imperial City Guards, and soldiers and horses were constantly gathering in this direction. Chapter 664. Yin Xiaoyao stood at the door with his hands behind his back. His expression was cold, and he said nothing. When everyone who came saw Yin Xiaoyao standing there as a gatekeeper, they immediately knew that this was not something they could meddle in. They stopped at once, and no one stepped forward to ask questions, lest they invite a rebuff. Until the Crown Prince arrived with a few guards, panting and disheveled. Seeing Yin Xiaoyao at the door, he stepped forward and bowed. "I see that Uncle Yun is here. Greetings. Where are you headed, Your Highness?" Yin Xiaoyao asked faintly. "I heard that something happened to Sir Bai, and I was anxious. I came to visit him." "Has Sir Bai been saved?" The Crown Prince replied. "Your Highness is indeed a man who values friendship and loyalty. It's a pity that I have other reasons for coming here. I really didn't notice if there were any survivors here. Uncle Yun, I would like to go in and take a look." His Highness looked anxious. Sir Bai had too many things in his hands. Once these things were exposed, it was uncertain whether he would be able to keep his life, let alone sit on the throne. How could the Crown Prince not be anxious? He knew that his arrival would leave a mark, but he had to come anyway. Yin Xiaoyao said coldly, "They are still dealing with the aftermath inside, and there is still a considerable degree of danger remaining. If Your Highness wishes to go in, I'm afraid you'll have to wait a little longer. As the saying goes, a gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. Why rush?" The Crown Prince could not afford to wait. His forehead beaded with sweat, he said, "Uncle Yun, I must go in immediately. Sir Bai is the chief advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. I urgently want to know if he is dead or alive. I think I have the right to go in and see how Sir Bai is." The Crown Prince's tone had gradually turned forceful, obviously intending to barge in by force. If it were not for his fear of Yun Xiaoyao's reputation and martial prowess, he would have barged in by force. Yun Xiaoyao's eyes gleamed sharply as he said faintly, "If Your Highness is in a hurry, then try to barge past me. As long as Your Highness can do it, I guarantee that no one will stop Your Highness from doing anything in the future." The Crown Prince was speechless. Yin Xiaoyao's sharp gaze swept past the Crown Prince. Suddenly, he raised his aura to its peak and looked at the guards behind the Crown Prince. The 8 guards accompanying the Crown Prince felt as if a mountain had suddenly descended upon them. They could not help but let out a muffled groan as their legs went weak. They knelt on the ground in an orderly manner, unable to even stand up for a moment. Yin Xiaoyao replied, "Whether you plead verbally or beg on your knees, I am indifferent. Besides, I am worthy of your kneeling. Since all of you have knelt down, stay on your knees. Don't get up." His aura was like a mountain, even more so than before, suppressing these people until they couldn't stand up. No, they couldn't even move. The Crown Prince took a step forward. Yun Xiaoyao's gaze was warm as he looked at the Crown Prince with a smile, as if he was looking at his nephew. However, one of his hands was already gently placed on the hilt of the sword at his waist. The Crown Prince immediately sensed a wave of ruthless aura surging toward him. His entire body was enveloped by a terrifying atmosphere, and his hair stood on end. He had clearly lifted his foot, but he did not dare to step down. Would Yin Xiaoyao dare to kill me? Yin Xiaoyao dares to kill me. Cold sweat trickled down the Crown Prince's forehead as he froze on the spot. At that moment, silhouettes flickered in Sir Bai's residence. Yin Yang was the first to step out, his expression calm and composed. Yin Xiaoyao's gaze met his and Yin Yang blinked. At that moment, a thick fog appeared behind Yin Yang and rose into the air. Everyone who had participated in the operation disappeared into the thick fog, vanishing without a trace. Only Yin Yang and Yin Xiaoyao were left at the door. Yin Xiaoyao said faintly, "Since this is over, let's go." The father and son duo strode forward together and swaggered off, not uttering a single word of nonsense. They did not even spare a glance at the Crown Prince who was right in front of them. The Crown Prince's expression grew even more displeased, his eyes glinting with malice. "It's fine if I can't ascend to the throne in this lifetime, but if I can rule the world, Yun Xiaoyao, Yun Yang, I'll exterminate your entire family and your entire family. I'll cut you into pieces and consign you to eternal damnation. Go in." Although he knew that there would most likely be nothing useful left after Yun Yang had searched the place, His Highness still held on to a sliver of hope. Casting a vicious glance at the 8 guards whom he had relied on as a wall, the Crown Prince felt incredibly aggrieved. His ability was still too weak. So weak that others would not even spare a glance at him. What should he do? "Did you find anything inside?" Yin Xiaoyao asked. "Nothing at all. The development of this matter is too strange. Everything seems so unexpected, full of twists and turns. It's inexplicable." Yin Yang was genuinely distressed. In his imagination, a civil and military official like Sir Bai would have to struggle with all his might to match his identity and common sense, no matter what. Compared to the current situation, he should have been faced with countless conspiracies and traps, deliberately set up to mislead him, or even directly kill him. Perhaps something else would have been more appropriate, however, none of the preparations he had made had been used. Sir Bai had died so mysteriously. He had even died in triumph, revealing Yun Yang's true identity before he died. The phrase, "Supreme Cloud, you didn't expect this, did you?" was truly an insolence that could still be high-spirited even in death. After this battle, he had somehow fallen into a disadvantageous position. However, no matter how Yun Yang racked his brains, he could not figure out why. There were no clues left at the scene, let alone anything of value. This outcome made the situation even more confusing. If there was something to be gained, it would be the expression on the dead man's face. After careful observation, Yun Yang came to a conclusion. Sir Bai, who was sitting on the chair, was in a relaxed state when he died while the other 3 were calm. It was a relaxed expression of letting go of something or getting rid of something. That was probably it. There was a white gold piece in Yin Yang's palm. Before Sir Bai died, he had been holding this white gold piece in his hand. Yin Yang felt that if Sir Bai's death had any hint or obsession, or if there was something he could not let go of, it would fall on him. But he had died a clean death, and all that was left was this white chess piece in his hand. What did it mean? If it was a hint, what was it? Yin Yang opened his palm and stared deeply at the white gold piece. He frowned and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 665. Looking at the chess piece in Yun Yang's hand, Yun Xiaoyao suddenly asked, "Is this what Sir Bai held in his hand before he died?" "That's right." Yin Yang nodded. "How much can this chess piece say?" Yin Xiaoyao asked again. Yin Yang was deep in thought. Yin Yang had already checked it again and again. This was really just an ordinary chess piece. There was really not much to say. Yin Xiaoyao paused and said, the practical significance of a chess piece is nothing more than a component of the chessboard. In other aspects, even as a secret weapon of an unparalleled expert, its effect is not as significant as it is on the chessboard. Yin Yang replied, this isn't absolute. Different people have different opinions. I, on the other hand, think that if a chess piece's corresponding move is used well, it can determine the outcome of the game. Yin Xiaoyao said. That's true. Yin Yang was still nodding. Chess piece. Yin Xiaoyao racked his brain, wanting to provide Yin Yang with more ideas, but there was nothing more he could say no matter how hard he racked his brain. Chess piece. Yin Yang was deep in thought. A chess piece. Without a person, a chess piece is a rock, a piece of rotten wood, a dead object. It will only be useful when it falls into the hands of a person. In the hands of an expert in secret weapons, even the most ordinary chess piece can be used to determine life and death. Therefore, the key is still the person and the hand. Before Sir Bai died, the last thing he did was to set up a game of Go and hold a chess piece in his hand. Yin Yang said, do you think he felt that he was a chess piece and that he was unwilling to die? He turned abruptly to look at Yin Xiaoyao. Yin Xiaoyao sighed softly. Who isn't a chess piece in this world? Yin Yang frowned and said, his death was strange but effortless. Could he have thought that he had freed himself from the fate of being a chess piece and being controlled by others through his death? At the last moment of his life, he broke free from a terrifying hand by deciding the moment of his death? If that's the case, it makes sense, Yin Yang said. Yin Xiaoyao was deep in thought, speechless for a moment. It was obvious that the logic in Yin Yang's words was beyond his comprehension. Looks like the person behind him is really terrifying. Otherwise, why would he resort to suicide to put up such an extreme resistance? Yin Yang said, I think he had confirmed his final path of return and was finally willing. He didn't expect to be manipulated by a chess player before he died, so he chose to commit suicide. Since I'm going to die no matter what, I might as well choose how I die. Or, did his suicide destroy the chess player's plan? Yin Yang pondered, if I have been manipulated all my life, can I use my power to retaliate against this person who has manipulated me all my life before I die? If I can use my death as the last and most extreme counterattack, it will be a consolation. Therefore, Sir Bai is truly a wise man. I just don't know if this wise man's thinking direction is the same as mine. However, before Sir Bai died, he held a white Go piece in his palm. Does this color, white, have any other meaning? The 9 supreme cloud was also the 9 supreme wit. Wise men and wise men would always think alike. As the saying went, great men thought alike, and wise men thought alike or even more. After some speculation, Yin Yang felt that even though he could not fully replicate what Sir Bai had in mind, he was still confident that he could do so. Returning to the residence of Yin Yang set up the Go game in his room. He sat with his legs crossed and focused on the Go board. At this moment, he had completely immersed his thoughts into Sir Bai's state of mind. According to Yin Yang's understanding of Sir Bai, this person could be said to be meticulous in his calculations. If such a person were to be a civil official, it would be a piece of cake for him to move freely in the imperial court. It would only take him some effort even if he were to control the world. At the very least, he could become a minister. If he were to enlist in the military, he would at least be another Han Sanhe. Even if he could not compare to Han Sanhe, he should not be weaker than Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin. If I were Sir Bai, I have the talent to rule the world and the wisdom to bring peace and stability to the country, but I'm only one of the civil and military ministers of a martial world organization in the Four Seasons Tower. I have to be controlled all the time, unable to break free. Will I be aggrieved? Yin Yang asked himself. I will. I will be aggrieved. I definitely will. Yin Yang looked at the Go board. Since I'm aggrieved, what should I do? I can't even control my own life and death. What else can I do? There's only hope if I live. Persevere for a long time, maybe I can endure until the end and the day when I can break free. This should be my initial thought. A wise man is human too. A human is not willing to give up hope, and the chance of a fluke. Yet, after working hard for so long, I don't get the result I want. Until one day, when I realize that not only am I unable to break free from the control of my life and death, but I'm about to be abandoned, what will happen then? Yin Yang was shaken as he murmured, "Why would I think of being abandoned?" He immediately recalled the injuries of Sir Bai and the other three. Their life essence had deteriorated and their organs had dried up. Yin Yang suddenly thought of Supreme Lord Spring Frost back then. He seemed to have understood something and figured something out. If this is the case. Yin Yang sucked in a deep breath and looked at the white chess piece in his palm, saying softly, "Sir Bai, if I've guessed correctly, you should have left something for me. Why didn't I find anything? What did you actually leave for me? This doesn't make sense. More importantly, he actually knows that I'm Supreme Cloud. Why would he know? Even if he guessed it, he should have sufficient proof. He knows that I'm Supreme Cloud, but he didn't say anything. Previously, we were on opposing sides. Going against the 9 Supremes has always been the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate goal. He knows that I'm Supreme Cloud, but he didn't reveal it to the higher authorities of the Four Seasons Tower. With the Four Seasons Tower's emphasis on the 9 Supremes' intelligence, if he had known earlier, he would only need to report it and it would be a great merit. Therefore, he must have guessed it not long ago. With this merit, he might even want to break free from the control. At the very least, he could live a much better life. There's nothing to lose. Then it can be confirmed that he didn't know long ago but only found out just now. If he only found out just now, why didn't he choose to report it in exchange for benefits? It must be because at this time, he had already discovered that his 5 internal organs had dried up. That he realized that the Four Seasons Tower was targeting him? That he wanted him dead? At this point, it was already too late for him to turn the situation around. That's why he chose to hide my identity. No matter how Yin Yang thought about it, there was still something he could not figure out. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.